Okay, in that case, we'll get started. It's 7:02. Good evening. It's Tuesday, September 14th, 2021. This is a regular meeting of the Policy and Services Committee. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Stone?
Here.
Chair Koo?
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka? For the record, we have a quorum.
Okay, so we'll get started. How about we start with oral communications first? Is there anybody with their hands raised?
No, Chair, there's no one with their hand raised from the public.
Okay, very good. In that case, we'll move on to our action item. First action item is update on state and federal policy and legislation. And we'll start with Mr. Haynes with our federal lobbyist.
Thank you. If I could just give a quick introduction. Thanks, Chair. So we have today a representative from Van Scoyoc Associates who represents the city at the federal level as one of our legislative advocates. And we also have, and that's Mr. David Haynes, and we have Mr. Nicolo DeLuca, who is from Townsend Public Affairs representing us at the state level. So they both plan to just give an overview of what's happening at the respective levels of government, address any questions that you all have, and at the state level session has wrapped up. So Mr. DeLuca will have some specifics on that. But David has lots of updates about what's going on funding wise and legislation wise at the federal level. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you, council members. It's great to be with you this evening from Washington, D.C. During what looks to be a very eventful month this month. Over the last month or so, both the House and Senate have been out of session for their traditional August recess that regularly happens. But the House has come back on the committee front this week, and the Senate returned to work on nominees. On the House committee front, the ultimate focus has been trying to finalize the language for the Democrats' $3.5 trillion reconciliation package, which I'll discuss in just a moment. But wanted to dive right in. One of the hot topics right now in Washington, as you've inevitably heard about, is infrastructure. That is the buzzword right now across the federal government. And there are two forms of infrastructure that are being worked on, two legislative pieces. One of them is the Senate passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So that is the bipartisan infrastructure bill that also includes $550 billion in new federal spending. So it's on everything from rail grade separation to roads and bridges, to transit, broadband, airport, wildfire mitigation, electric grid, a lot of other issues. And the House is scheduled to vote on that by September 27th under an agreement with Speaker Pelosi and moderate Democrats. But it's still uncertain when that vote will happen. And right now, Speaker Pelosi is looking to combine a vote on this bipartisan infrastructure bill with something else that can move before in the next 2 weeks, ultimately. It's hard to believe. As I mentioned earlier, there are two different infrastructure bills that are being worked on right now. The other one is the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that I mentioned, and that's the human infrastructure package that is currently being worked on in the House and Senate, but is particularly getting attention in the House because all the committees are drafting their bill of jurisdiction. For example, today, the House Financial Services Committee approved a bill that would have $8.5 billion in community development block grant funding and rental assistance and funding for public housing and even energy efficiency in houses as well. But some of the other sections have childcare, education, climate initiatives, and other areas as well. This is bill, I mentioned budget reconciliation. This bill they're using budget reconciliation to pass this bill, ultimately because in the Senate, they'll only need 51 votes to pass the bill. But that could be a concern with moderate Democrats. senator from West Virginia that's been in the news a lot lately, Senator Manchin. He has raised concerns that 3.5 trillion may be too high. And so Senate leadership is looking at potentially bringing that number down. But the bill will ultimately pass in the House, and then senators will try to work on the bill from there. As you have heard about, moving on into just a quick touch on housing from the administration front and in Congress. Congress tried to continue the federal eviction moratorium that was continuing and ongoing. That was deemed not legal from the Supreme Court, and that was discontinued. The administration now is looking at other ways to help evictions, encouraging localities and states to implement eviction moratoriums, but also looking at different financing measures, as well as emergency rental assistance program that provides funding either for entities over 200,000 or comes down through the states. Also, another major issue that's ongoing is the appropriations. Chantel mentioned that the government runs out of funding at the end of this fiscal year, which is in 2 weeks. And so Congress is fiercely debating what happens next with that. So ultimately, congressional leadership is working on some kind of short-term continuing resolution or CR. And so what that means is just current levels would be ongoing for anywhere from the next few weeks after September 30th, but most likely probably towards the end of the year, just to give a little bit more time to work on the appropriations. Just as a reminder for Palo Alto, there are earmarked or community project fundings that we were able to get into the House appropriations bill, and that one of those is for the Cahoots program. We're working with Congresswoman Eshoo on that funding, and that is currently in the House bill, but with the continuing resolution, that would not be included, but is a possibility for future funding at the end of the year with a larger agreement. Also, Senator Padilla has submitted, we were working with Senator Padilla's office, and he has submitted a request for $6 million for the fire station replacement project. As that project would be the same as the Cahoots project, that there's a potential to be included in a future agreement. The last two items I just wanted to quickly touch on are the debt limit that needs to be resolved and a COVID issue that recently came up. The debt limit, it expired at the end of July. And so Congress is looking at figuring out a way to either raise the debt limit or make a way that we don't default on the federal debt. And so Republicans are pushing back on that right now, but Democrats are looking at what must-pass measure they can put some form of increase into that agreement. And so, but ultimately, that's one of the handful of major issues that needs to be resolved. Lastly, I mentioned COVID. I just wanted to flag for you, you've probably seen it in the news, but OSHA recently announced that they will require employers with more than 100 employees to ensure their workers get vaccinated or get tested weekly. I was on a phone call with OSHA this week, and they reinforced that that would be applying to local government workers, particularly in states that have a state OSHA plan. And they also said that because it's under emergency action for the protection of employees, that they would not be taking any public input on the rule. So that they said they should have something, be putting something out in the next few weeks, but just wanted to put that on your radar. And then, lastly, public safety and police reform continues to be worked on, and as well as several other areas I'm happy to discuss with you, but also happy to answer any questions that you may have. So great to be with you. Thank you again.
Should we go to the public before we go to state, or for public comments, or shall we just go ahead and?
It's up, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, it's up to you. That's right. Chantal and I were both going to say the same thing, as you wish.
Okay, you saw that Mr. Haynes, because it's pretty late for Mr. Haynes, I just figured maybe we can go to a public for questions. And if there's anything he can answer from those questions, then that would help. Madam Clerk, would you open it? Would you see if there's any questions from the public or
Absolutely.
comments? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Someone would like to comment on this item, please use the raise your hand function. Excellent. Ms. Winter Dellenbach, you can make your comments on the item up to 3 minutes.
I want to start out by saying that this is the second Policy and Services meeting I've attended where I could not access the meeting with the message repeatedly coming up as I repeatedly tried to access the meeting, saying that another meeting was in progress. This time it was the Finance Committee. And I really think that this needs to get worked out where the public can access a meeting on time. Please.
I had the same issue.
Yes, 2 Policy and Services Committee meetings. Yes, and Councilmember Tanaka certainly. So that's an issue that please work that out. In terms of this item, I would appreciate it if our lobbyists could please, when they address these very that when they have been amended, that you explain what the amendments are, how they have changed the bills, so that we understand what the current bills are. And also with AB 718, I think it is, Skinner, it looks as if it is not moving forward this session. I would like to know what the lobbyists think will happen to it, if anything, in the next session. Will it rise again or not? And and I'm assuming you're going to go through the each of the bills that the city supported, and also, well, just that's what I wanted to say. Amendments, please address that, and then the one bill, Skinner, that went down that we supported. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Through the chair, there are no further requests to speak.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I guess we got some questions for the state lobbyist. He can answer that later on when he gives his presentation. But I wanted to come back to the committee and see if my colleagues have any comments or questions for our federal lobbyists. Councilmember Stone.
Thank you. And sorry if I jumped during this, it's because a spider just crawled across my desk and I am looking for it. So if anyone, I know the police department's on the call, maybe some emergency help. I'm not a fan. All right, back to it, but got to stay focused. Just a couple questions for our federal lobbyists. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And for the report and update. Are grants a part of the infrastructure bills for cities? I mean, is there any possibility that we'll be able to, if not the city directly through the county or the state, get funding for grade separation or affordable housing that could then be applied to Palo Alto?
Absolutely. And some of the programs, particularly, and first of all, thanks for that question, Councilman Stone. I should have said that. But for example, you brought up the rail grade separation. Some of the funding will have to be worked out, assuming the bills pass. So on the agency level, we'd figure out more details on that front. But as an example for rail grade separation in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's $10 billion for infrastructure projects broadly, but rail grade separation is mentioned as one of those eligible projects. There's also 2.5 billion specifically to address at-grade rail highway crossings. And then in addition to that, another one that's been a program that's been around for a while, you may have heard of Tiger, the Build program. These are discretionary programs. It's now called RAISE in this administration, but they're discretionary programs. It's a discretionary program that can be used for these type of projects. And that includes 7.5 billion. So there's a long ways before passage, but there's absolutely funding on that front. I mentioned CDBG because there's so much discretionary. There's a lot of discretionary use within the community development block grant program. There is, I think, 7.5 billion in that for the infrastructure. 8.5 billion dollars for the CDBG in the human infrastructure program. And so, and you know, as well as home funding type support and other public funding. You know, the administration right now is looking also at financing in ways to work with low cost financing as to build low income housing and to make that more available, but also to funding ways to encourage state and local governments. This was from the White House last week, to encourage state and local governments to also address this issue. I know Palo Alto is working on it, and it was a vague statement, but one that points to where the White House at least is hoping to get to. So there is funding for those programs and others. There's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot to get to from here to passage point, but you know, there's optimism, particularly on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and potentially a smaller pulled back bill from the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I did see that the IIJA includes funding for, like you said, rail grade separations, wildfire mitigation, electric grid, and other energy improvements. So that's good to see. But yeah, the no earmarks part is, I guess, concerning from a city perspective. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And you mentioned the human infrastructure bill. Will that have congressional earmarks in it? The report wasn't clear on that.
It does not. At this time, it does not have earmarks in it. Chairman, Transportation and Infrastructure Chairman DeFazio is trying to change that process and trying to be creative to allow earmarks in that bill or one of the infrastructure bills. Right now, though, there are not earmarks.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question for you, and this kind of this sort of involves, I guess, an understanding of the state program as well. So if you're not able to answer that's okay. I know did the CDC their eviction moratorium that was recently overturned, did that offer any additional protections beyond what the state's eviction moratorium is currently providing?
The eviction moratorium that was overturned did not. It was just overturning it. The eviction moratorium that was in place was completely removed. As a result, you know, I mentioned the emergency rental assistance program that the administration has been promoting. They've really been pushing that program to help prevent evictions, but from a federal front, there is no federal eviction moratorium.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm trying to understand is because we have a state program, and are there concerns for Palo Altans with the federal eviction moratorium being overturned? Has that stripped away protections for Californians and Palo Altans that doesn't exist currently under the state eviction moratorium?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. No, it was purely based on the Supreme Court saying the CDC did not have the ability to make this eviction moratorium. They said if it was going to happen on the federal front, it should have happened from Congress. Congress does not have the votes to pass a federal eviction moratorium. But the White House, I think I mentioned, but pardon me if I didn't, the White House has been encouraging the usage of the state and local eviction moratoriums as a way to protect people around the country.
You know, and I the legal reasoning behind it, and maybe this is something that our state lobbyists are here, if they understand the protections that the federal law provided compared to the state law. Have we lost additional protections with the federal law being repealed? I don't know if our state lobbyists want to weigh in on that.
Mikalo, did you want to take that?
I would happily jump in. Council member, so as you know, the state's eviction moratorium ends at the end of this month. So starting October 1st, it kind of goes back to normal. My understanding is the state went above and beyond what the Fed said, and primarily the federal government gave aid and gave direct aid to the state. And then the state on their own, due to the surplus, also provided aid. And so if I recall correctly, and I'll happily look it up, but you were able to defer a significant amount of your rent. You were able to get, delay your rent. Landlords were able to get some relief. And then you'd work through either your city or your county to secure those funds. My recollection is Palo Alto was one of the cities that deferred to the county, which was very common throughout the state. Only a handful of cities did the programs on their own. But to answer your question directly, state, and this is only for residential. There was never any commercial eviction moratorium at all. So on the residential side, starting October 1st, it goes back to business as usual. Federal government provided a tremendous amount of funding to the state. The state then almost met that amount of funding and provided the huge amount as part of the state's rent relief program. And if a landlord and a tenant signed the agreement, they were able to defer the rent and then go back and secure those funds as long as the funding was available. So hopefully that answers your question, but that's the comments from the state side.
Okay, that does. Thank you. I appreciate it. And just a quick final question then for Mr. Haynes. Are you aware, or if any Palo Alto residents are receiving help under the ERAP, or do you not have that information available?
I don't have the individual information available.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are all my questions I have for Mr. Haynes at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka?
Thanks for the update. Question about infrastructure, which is how much, do you guys know approximately how much will come to Palo Alto? How much of the dollars?
That funding, thanks for that question, Councilman. That detailed or finite of information is not available yet, based on individual cities or specifically to Palo Alto.
When will we know?
Could you repeat that question, please?
When will we know how much will be coming to Palo Alto?
Well, I think it's on two different fronts. From the, I think there are programs that are competitive that are included in the infrastructure bill, and obviously, as we can assume, that is possible funding, but it would not be. We would not know what would be coming from those programs. There are formula programs that are included. I mentioned CDBG, for example. So if there was a large amount of community development block grant funding, we would be able to figure that out based on prior formulas. But there's potential change that's still going to happen in these bills. And so to even to say this amount of money or that amount of money is going to come to Palo Alto would not be accurate at this point, likely.
Okay, how about maybe that if not to our city, how about to our district then? Do we know how much is coming to our district?
As far as there's a lot, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot that's going to happen still at the congressional front, but then the agency front as well. And so, particularly with these new programs, and so what is going to the state or local level still is undetermined.
Okay. I mean, that would be very interesting because
we're happy to work with staff to try to provide that information to you as it's available.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second question in regards to infrastructure is, I remember hearing on the Senate version of the infrastructure bill that there were some policies around heavily restricting and regulating cryptocurrency. And I think that still stayed in the Senate version of the bill. I think it's in the House version of the bill as well. And I was wondering if you've been keeping up on it and whether this can get pulled out in the House version of the bill.
There have been more and more hearings on cryptocurrency. It is still in there, particularly. I think there was tax. I think there were some tax provisions and oversight provisions. Ultimately, whether it's in the infrastructure bill or somewhere else, Congress is looking at how do we provide more oversight and what is the future of cryptocurrency? How does that fit into United States monetary policy? And so if it's not through infrastructure, there are enough members and senators that want to see changes to the federal policy that I would expect something else to be coming. So that's an answer in a manner of speaking of could be in this one, but also it is possible that there'll be other avenues as well.
Do you think that it's going to stay in there? I mean, if you count the votes and count who's for and against it, do you know if it's going to stay or not?
To make a absolute absolute answer on that one, no, but it did pass. The language did pass in the Senate, and so I think that there is a good chance that it could stay in there, but I can't say that with absolute certainty.
I think this is in like the finance committee or something. I forgot the exact name of the committee, but did it pass through there?
It did pass in there, yes.
Okay, so the crypto restrictions were still in the finance committee version.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. Because there's a lot of like non-infrastructure things in there, like this crypto stuff. In your experience, when things aren't kind of modified, like things like this aren't modified on the committee level, how likely is it that it gets modified on the House level?
If it's not modified, could you clarify that? If it's not modified on the
committee level,
on the committee level,
on the committee level, yeah. If it fails to get removed on a committee level, how likely is it to remove on the House level?
Right now, because there's a lot of influence from the top leadership in the House and the Senate. Influence has been more centralized than it has been in the past. The House and Senate leadership is influencing the bills before they're coming out of committee. That is unique to decades past. And so there is certainly potential for change, but there have been limits to limits to some of the larger bills to the amendment process on the floor. So it really depends on what leadership decided to do on that front, from the changes from the committee to the floor.
Okay. And do you think this infrastructure bill is going to pass?
The bipartisan infrastructure bill has a very strong chance of passing. So that's $1 trillion, plus dollar bill. That is, as I mentioned, bipartisan support. Republicans are right now concerned about the connection between, potential connection between the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the $3.5 trillion bill, as well as, potential inflation in general. But the bipartisan infrastructure bill has a very strong chance to pass. And as I mentioned earlier, already passed in the Senate. Speaker Pelosi made a commitment to bring up the bill by September 27th. The $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill in its current state will have a very difficult time passing. In its current state, I would say it will not pass, particularly because of the moderate senators raising concern about the price of it. A version of it in a lower amount could pass and has a potential to pass, especially with how much of a priority it's been made by Democratic leadership in the White House.
So the smaller bill, the $1 trillion bill, has a crypto, is likely to pass, but the bigger bill unlikely to pass right now. In the bigger bill, what in there might benefit our city?
In the bigger bill, you said?
Mm-hmm.
In the bigger bill, there's that is where the community development block grant funding is. Other housing funding is also in there. There is an emphasis on, in addition to housing, there's energy efficiency as well. There's professional training and development that was also put in there that would help people around the city. Childcare funding as well, that would be helpful. With it being right now a $3.5 trillion bill, those are only some of them, but some of the big ticket items.
Okay, so but this one is not likely to pass, at least in its current form. There's a smorgasbord of different things which could benefit the city, but we have no idea how much we would get, if anything.
Yeah, there would be money that would come to the city, but the specific amounts are unclear.
Okay, I mean, because the community block grants right now are teeny tiny, right? They're almost inconsequential right now.
Yeah,
but 3.5 trillion, it could be pretty consequential, but I don't know. I mean, it sounds. I guess I'm just because that's like 3.5 trillion seems like a lot of money to me, and I'm just trying to think of like, there's got to be some idea of how it's divvied up among all the states and cities and whatnot, isn't there? I mean, how does this money, where is this money going to go, right? There has to be some sort of plan for how it's going to be spent, right?
It's the committees are, I'll just jump in just real quick, Chantel. The committees are actually still formulating the plan as well, so I should make that clear. So before the committees even draft what is expected to be $3.5 trillion, it's hard to know and impossible to know what grants are in there and where that funding would be going.
And the only piece I wanted to add, Councilmember Tanaka, is that even for something like CDBG, if it's a formula, we'll still be held to the constraints of the formula, which is why our CDBG allocation is less than some other communities, because there is a level that's used for providing that for local allocations, and then other pots of funding that will come through the human infrastructure bill, if it passes, will just be dependent on if it's a grant in and of itself or something else that's based on formula. So I think that's part of why David's having a difficult time trying to pin down specific dollars we'll get, because a lot of it is up in the air.
Yeah, so that's the dollar coming in. What about the dollar going out? So in terms of these bills getting funded, how much of it comes, give you an idea of how much would be coming from, people in our city, companies and residents in our city towards this bill? I'm just trying to think of, like, we don't know how many dollars are coming in, but do we know like roughly how many dollars will be coming out of our city in the form of increased fees or taxes or whatnot? Or is it just printing money? Like how is it going to be paid?
It's interesting you asked that, Councilman, because there is built-in dynamic growth as one of the pay fors. And so that was a Republican strategy used over the last few years when they were in the majority. So, and that is expectation for certain funds to grow, and it's used as a creative offset for how to pay for the funding. Otherwise, the pay fors are still being worked out right now, and how that would be offset. But clearly, it's not going to be a dollar for dollar situation.
Okay. Because I would imagine our area is a higher income area versus most other areas. So I read something about how people with relatively high incomes or higher incomes are going to be taxed higher to help pay for some of this.
Yeah,
and so I'm just wondering whether our city and district would be disproportionately hit by this versus the number of dollars coming into our city. So I'm just trying to see if you have any ideas, or because that's what I'm trying to think about this, right? How many dollars do we go out that goes out? How many dollars come in, right? We don't know how many dollars are going to come in yet, right? So, but do we know any ideas of how many dollars might come out of this? And how many of the people in our city would be impacted by something like this?
One of the pay fors that that has been discussed has been IRAs that are over a certain level. So 5 million has been a level that I've heard discussed within leadership, congressional leadership. They're looking at other ways as well. And I should say, since you mentioned income and taxes, there is a group that is pushing for the state and local tax SALT to be addressed, and that could turn into something that Democrats either push to include in the human infrastructure bill, or consider, at least in the House, for some form of increase of the $10,000 caps right now, or potentially do some form of delay of those caps for a few years. But just like everything else, offsets and funding have gotten in the way of addressing that, since those caps were decreased to $10,000 in the 2017 tax bill.
So what SALT was, if I'm understanding correctly, is the part where the blue states pay a higher tax than the red states, right? And so SALT should, is it trying to like roll back some of the SALT impacts so that, okay, so so that would be a good thing for us, right? But still, like,
It would be.
The money for the 1 trillion, 3.5 trillion has come from somewhere. Either we print it or we tax it, right? There's no two ways around it, right? So so I mean, do you know any idea of how much of it is taxed, how much of it is I guess you could also do debt, or you print money. Do you know how much, which of the three buckets this stuff is coming from?
I think they're taking an all of the above approach. As I mentioned earlier, they don't have offsets for the complete package yet, and those are still being worked on. But the idea of the creative and dynamic growth is something that they're going to be leaning in inevitably, and have said that they're leaning into as well.
Because someone here in our city, which would live what most would consider a very middle class lifestyle, right? Not a fancy house or fancy car. Like under the income provision I saw, would be taxed considerably more, even though they're not, necessarily rich, right? Maybe rich compared to someone in a different state, but not rich for Palo Alto by any stretch of imagination. So I'm just trying to get a feel of and is this something you're trying to advocate for? And that, I mean, I would imagine that for the folks in our city, right? I mean, we would want to see the net tax dollar coming to our city, not going out of our city, right? I don't know if have you done any work around that, or advocate for something like that, where we see net inflow of dollars coming to our city versus a net outflow from our city?
We have not seen any breakdowns of what that looks like. And inevitably with the current makeup of the House, they are looking at changing some of the tax structure, and inevitably they're going to be looking to tax certain levels of income. And so
It seems like they're taxing wealthier areas and that,
Mhm.
and so, but I'm just wondering, does that mean the wealthier areas also get more of the money or just goes to other places? So that's something I'm just trying to understand. And
So
Yeah,
Councilmember Tanaka, I don't think Mr. Haynes is going to be able to answer this question in terms of how to balance it and which
oh, no,
areas are going to
I'm
be.
just asking in terms of, because he's our lobbyist, right? He's supposed to advocate for us. So I'm just trying to see if this is something you're trying to advocate for, right? Just try to advocate, net dollars towards our city, basically. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get at.
And we are certainly advocating for additional resources for the city. I think because higher taxes are it's a proposal that is and it's an idea that's desired broadly. It's something that's being implemented or will be implemented and is currently and continuing to be looked at. So I think where our focus has been more on is how can we make sure that those resources and the federal resources can come to the city, as we were just discussing, to be able to offset some of those potential taxes or other needs as well.
So I'm gonna say we're gonna have to kind of start moving on to the state legislation, but I see Councilmember Stone, you still have your hand up? No?
Yep, sorry.
Okay, so I just have a very quick question. It's about the ERAP. That is, how does that apply? I mean, is this funds that federal government gives to the state and then we apply, the city of Palo Alto applies for it? No. I see Mr. DeLuca nodding and shaking his head. So maybe that question is for you.
Happy to. Madam Council Member, so you, if I recall correctly, Santa Clara County was the recipient of the funds and, so to speak, the bank. And so there was a process through HCD, the state agency, that tenants would register and property owners would register. And once you register, then you're eligible to apply for those funds. The state tried to make it as simple as possible, though at the same time, keeping in mind they want to eliminate any opportunities for fraud. So the feds gave the money to the state took the federal dollars, added some more, and then gave a process for either cities or counties to serve as the bank. And my recollection is Santa Clara County served as the bank, so to speak, for the rental assistance program. I think Councilmember Stone, you asked a question about knowing a number of Palo Altans if they applied for it or what have you. I think you can work through the county to get, obviously keep in mind privacy concerns and what have you, but you could get an overall estimate of how many either tenants or property owners enrolled in the program.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure, Mr. Haynes, you're working with our city manager's office, Chantal, Ms. Gaines, in order to keep up with what we're advocating for and what we're asking you to watch out for at the Capitol in DC. So I just want to say, if there's no other comments, thank you very much for being here tonight and giving us an update.
Absolutely, and thank you. And we'll continue to work with the city on the priorities and try to bring those resources back to the city, both new and current ones.
It's very
Thank you
nice
so
to
much.
meet you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go to Mr. DeLuca and welcome Mr. Ramirez. I see you're here. Thank you for being here tonight.
So honorable council members, Madam City Manager, Madam City Attorney, Nicolo DeLuca, Townsend Public Affairs, Andres Ramirez, also Townsend Public Affairs. Respectful for time. So if you're okay with this, I was going to give a quick overview of where things stand in the state capitol, and then Andres is able to talk more specifically about bills that the city cares about, primarily the virtual meeting bill and what have you. So if you're okay with this, I'm just going to jump right in. So as you all know, the legislative session ended this Friday night. About 900 bills or so were sent to the governor. Certainly the volume 900 bills is a far cry from past sessions, but of course we were limited due to COVID. And as you remember, at the beginning of the year, there was a cap on how many bills could go to the second house. Meaning if you introduce a bunch of bills in the assembly, there's a cap on how many can go over to the Senate. In addition, we just finished the first year of our 2-year cycle. So some bills that are on hold can be heard starting in January of next year. So, and then of course, the governor has until October 10th to sign or veto any of these bills that get to his desk. Certainly, and we'll touch base on it in a little bit, massive backdrop that tonight's the recall. We don't have an estimate of numbers yet until the polls close at 8, though I have heard that about around 8 million out of, I think, 22 million ballots have already been returned. And so the assumption is of those 8 million, a high majority are from Democrats. So quickly, 3 things to touch upon. And then as I mentioned, Andres will talk about specific bills. Some good news, and Councilmember Tanaka, I've got some hard data for you. Late last week, the Newsom administration announced 2.75 billion of home key funding being announced. So they're doing a NOFA call for project. Home key, as you know, is one of the massive investments the state made in homelessness. This is a competitive application process, and it's for local governments to apply. Funding can be used to purchase or rehab hotels, motels, vacant apartment buildings. Your neighbors in Mountain View, they did some of the tiny homes. That's an eligible use. So we've been working with Chantal and the city team on this. The goal is really to basically turn 14,000 units into permanent long-term housing. So that's something that's good news for the city. More specifically, the county of Santa Clara received around 14 million on 14 million as a direct allocation to address homelessness. That came during when the budget was signed in July. So that's definitely something that the city can take a part of and partner with the city on some funding. A little bit of bad news, though it's going to be tabled. Transportation trailer bill, unfortunately, has been put on hold. The governor and legislators just could not get to an agreement. Kind of the root cause of the frustration was, you all might remember Prop 1A, the bond measure for high-speed rail. There was 4.2 billion left in those bond funds, and they need to be appropriated by the legislature. The big issue has traditionally been the Assembly has had concerns over high-speed rail, whether it's the funding plan, whether it's the use of funds, what have you. And so since the legislature has to appropriate those funds, this was an opportunity to push for changes. One of the big issues was really the electrification of some of the routes in the Central Valley. And frankly, the Assembly, primarily Assembly Transportation Chair Laura Friedman, who Anders and I were with about 3 weeks ago on a tour, she was clear. She really felt that a lot of those high-speed rail funds should go to major urban hubs, Bay Area and LA, because that's where a lot of the traffic is. So that's going to get kicked down until January, the earliest for formal action. We suspect negotiations will resume in October. A cooling off period was needed. And it's really that the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly all need to land on a plan. And then one more piece of good news, and it's something that I know that the city's been concerned about or supportive of, and then I'll kick it over to Andres on specific legislation. The 988 crisis line is becoming closer to reality. You might recall there was a legislative vehicle to implement a statewide 988 behavioral health crisis line. So there was a $20 million allocation that the governor was able to send to this proposal. The goal is really that in order to de-escalate certain issues, whether it's with the mentally ill or what have you. 988 is kind of a synonym for, instead of calling 911, you call 988. So there's 20 million for that program. Obviously, this is just a drop in the bucket, but it's a big push towards substance abuse and mental health, and the state moving away from a call 911 center where men and women with badges and guns come, and instead address it in a more mental health perspective. So I'm going to punt to Andres now, and then we are happy to answer any questions you all may have. And we just really want to thank the time and opportunity to meet with you, this committee, past committees, and we look forward to coming up with another really strong plan of attack going into the 2022 legislative session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicolo, and good evening, honorable council members. It's good to see all of you. Nicolo gave, sort of the backdrop of what happened at the end of the legislative session, what transpired. Now, I wanted to dig a little bit more into specific pieces of legislation that we have advocated on behalf of the city for to the state legislature. But before I go down the line item of bills that are in the agenda item, I did want to also discuss Assembly Bill 361 by Assemblymember Robert Rivas, because this is especially relevant for local jurisdictions in cities such as Palo Alto. So currently, Assembly Bill 361 is what they say is engrossing and enrolling and can be now presented to the governor for his consideration. It has passed both houses of the legislature pursuant to deadlines. Essentially, what this bill does, if it is signed into law by the governor, is it would allow local agencies, meaning a city, to continue with virtual meetings, but only if there is a declared state of emergency. And as you all know, we do have a declared state of emergency that does not yet have an expiration date attached to it. However, there are provisions in this bill that do sunset on January 1st of 2024 for cities, and then in 2022 for state legislative bodies. Here is another thing that we feel you all should know about the bill. And I know the city attorney and city manager's office does have this information, but I did want to reiterate it. Even under the state of emergency, the city must, in order to continue to meet remotely or via teleconferencing system, every 30 days or sooner than 30 days, make the following findings by a majority vote. Number one is that the legislative body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency. And number two is that either A, the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person, or B, state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. So both things that a local jurisdiction could pretty easily attest to. It's written that way as to be flexible and to continue to provide cities the opportunity to meet remotely if there are safety concerns. So that is one that is now available for the governor to consider and sign or veto. We have been checking in with the assembly members' offices almost on a daily basis, seeing what their thoughts are, engaging what the consensus is within the governor's administration, and all signs are trending towards the governor signing this bill. Obviously, anything can happen when a bill gets to the governor's desk. We've seen crazier things, but nonetheless, the overall sentiment in the legislature indicates that this will be a bill that will go through. So that's AB 361. Now, if you don't mind, I will go down into there's a matrix, and we have a list of bills that the city has taken a formal position on, some support and some oppose. And I'll just run through them very briefly and give you their status, because status has changed since the last time we presented to the Policy and Services Committee. So Assembly Bill 26 by Assemblymember Holden. This has to do with peace officers and use of force, and essentially the bill would require them to immediately report potentially excessive use of force. This is a bill that the city supported, and it is now at the governor's desk. Next is Assembly Bill 703 by Assemblymember Blanca Rubio. This was another bill that related to the Brown Act and teleconferencing. It was a bit more broad and open-ended as it relates to continuing augmented Brown Act provisions than Assembly Bill 361. And there wasn't a massive appetite for it throughout the legislative process. As such, it has been held, and it is a 2-year bill with the opportunity to reopen discussions in January of 2022. Assembly Bill 718 by Assemblymember Cunningham. This has to do with peace officers and investigations of misconduct. This is one of the many public safety reform related bills that we saw in this legislative session. It's one that the city supported, but has been held as a 2-year bill, and they can reconsider it going into 2022. Next, we have Assembly Bill 1346 by Assemblymember Berman from our district. And this has to do with air pollution for small off-road engines. Essentially would require the Air Resources Board to adopt cost-effective and technologically feasible regulations to prohibit engine exhaust and evaporative emissions from new, small off-road engines. This is a bill that the city has supported throughout the process. It's a bill by Assemblymember Berman, and it is now at the governor's desk for his consideration. The next one, and transitioning now to the Senate bills, we have Senate Bill 2 by Senator Stephen Bradford, which essentially creates a decertification process under the Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training. This is a bill that the city was able to support this legislative session, and it is now at the governor's desk for his consideration. The next two bills are two of the highly publicized big ticket housing bills that we saw throughout this legislative session and sessions prior. The first being Senate Bill 9 by Pro Tem Tony Atkins, which would require ministerial approval of lot splits and up to 2 residential units on a new lot with certain exceptions. Exceptions being, historic zones, high fire severity zones, and areas where any sort of increased density would pose a public safety risk. This bill, the city has opposed, and it is currently at the governor's desk for his consideration. And on this bill and other bills that we have, I'll just state this now, on this bill and other bills that we've taken either support or opposed positions on, myself and Nicolo are already getting started on respective signature or veto letters based on the previous positions that the city has held on the piece of legislation. So that is something that you can look forward to forthcoming that we will route through the city manager's office. With that, the next bill is Senate Bill 10 by Senator Scott Weiner. This bill is one that has been amended down significantly from its original bill a couple sessions ago, which sort of originally started out with Senate Bill 50 and transpired into another Senate bill last session, and then transpired into Senate Bill 10 this session, which would allow a city council to zone a parcel for up to 10 units of residential density in an urban infill site or a transit-rich area if they so choose. So this bill has now been amended down into an optional or opt-in bill for local jurisdictions. That is one that the city has traditionally held an opposed position on. The next bill, going back to public safety, is Senate Bill 16 by Senator Skinner. And this has to do with peace officers and release of records. And it would make a sustained finding involving force that is unreasonable or excessive, and any sustained finding that an officer failed to intervene against another officer using that force. It would make those instances subject to public disclosure. This is one of those public safety bills that the city of Palo Alto supported, and it is now at the governor's desk for his consideration. On to the last couple of bills here. Senate Bill 556. This is a bill by Senator Dodd from the North Bay area. And essentially it would loosen the local control over the placement of small wireless facilities on streetlight poles and traffic signal poles. This bill has been amended down so that cities can deny the placing of those small wireless facilities on those poles. in a reasonable instance, including reasonable aesthetic and safety standards. But nonetheless, it wouldn't give a city complete authority over saying, you know, a small wireless facility can or cannot be placed on one of those poles. That is a bill that the city has traditionally opposed. But since the last time we presented, those newer amendments that do allow a greater degree of local control on the placement of those wireless facilities have been implemented. On to the last two bills. Senate Bill 591 by Senator Becker. This would essentially authorize the establishment or development of an intergenerational housing development, which means both seniors along with their caregivers, as well as transition age youth or foster youth, could all be in one housing development. This is a bill that flew through both houses of the legislature, through policy committees, and in a pretty timely fashion was delivered to the governor for his consideration. And it's a bill that the city of Palo Alto has been supportive of from the early stages. And lastly, Senate Bill 765 by Senator Stern. This has to do with accessory dwelling units and setback standards. This is a bill that the city of Palo Alto supported, but it was held as a 2-year bill. There was a commitment by the author, Senator Stern, to engage further with stakeholders, because as you all know, there were a number of bills and discussions on ADUs that were, I guess you could say, transformative bills throughout the state of California in previous legislative sessions. And there was just a commitment by the author, along with various stakeholders, to further engage on this bill and make sure that they're not going to be mitigating any of those original ADU standards that were put in place. But nonetheless, these are conversations that can be re-engaged on as soon as January of next year. And that's certainly something that Nicolo and I will be following closely. With that, those are the bills that we have taken positions on. And as I stated previously, Nicolo and I are more than happy to get started on a number of signature and veto request letters to the governor and his legislative deputies within his administration. And happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Actually, Mr. Ramirez, could you touch upon AB 989, AB 1401, and AB 215 also?
Yes, absolutely. I can touch on those. So AB 989, this was a bill by Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel out of the Los Angeles area, which would have created an Office of Housing Appeals within California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, to review alleged violations of the Housing Accountability Act for specified housing development projects. So last time we presented on this, this bill was passed out of committee. However, it was upon the request of the author and the floor sponsor in the Senate pulled from floor consideration. We do have a call in to Assemblymember Gabriel's office to get a little bit more information as to why exactly the bill was pulled. And that's something that as soon as Nicolo and I get a little more clarity on, we're more than happy to report back through the city manager's office to share that information.
Thank you. I'd be very interested.
Absolutely. And that's again, like I said, that is something that we've reached out to as soon as that bill was pulled from the floor. And, you know, as soon as we engage in those conversations, we can let you all know, you know, what's transpiring and what this could look like going into the 2022 legislative session. So that was AB 989. AB 1401 was a bill by Assemblymember Laura Friedman, who, as you all know, is the Assembly Transportation Chair. And this bill would have prohibited local governments from imposing or enforcing a minimum parking requirement on developments near public transit. This bill was held under suspense and is no longer active for this year. There is a possibility that the bill can be brought back in a subsequent session or in the new year. But that is a bill that Nicolo and I are, of course, tracking closely, engaging with various stakeholders on, engaging with the author's office on, to see if we can get a little bit of an inside scoop as to whether or not there will be action on AB 1401 going forward. And you guys will all know as soon as we know. And then lastly, I believe you said Assembly Bill 215, correct?
Yes, true, right.
Yes, Assembly Bill 215 by Assemblymember Chu. So this bill has been amended several times, but in its latest form, it would essentially allow for greater control for HCD and others to review a local jurisdiction's I'm sorry, I'm finding the right word here. Adherence to various housing laws that currently exist and are overseen by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And one of the amendments that was recently implemented was that if the Attorney General of California and their office decides not to prosecute on a local jurisdiction for a violation of a existing housing law, that HCD is able to contract out with a separate litigator to engage in that litigation. So this is a bill that there was obviously a lot of amendments, and some of the more recent amendments, there's been a large amount of pushback from various jurisdictions because of the provision I just mentioned. And then additionally, they did remove a provision which would have required a city to be essentially named a pro-housing city by the Department of Housing and Community Development. That was something that there was a lot of local pushback on. That was removed by the assembly member. But nonetheless, we do understand that the more recent provisions could pose potential issues, and we've monitored it, and that bill is at the governor's desk for his consideration. And at the discretion of, council and the city manager's office, Nico and I are happy to take further action based on how we are directed on that bill.
Thank you. So earlier, one of the public commenters asked about if you could state the amendments, what they are. So on SB 16, would you be able to kind of give us an idea what the amendments were?
What might be easier, because if we go through all the bills, I think it might make more sense to send a written summary, because to get into the amendments right now, some are maybe a little benign, others are a bit complicated. But we are, Anders and I are happy to work with Ms. Gaines first thing in the morning to highlight what some of those amendments are. I just get a little concerned that we might get a little bit too much into the detail and then, I don't know, lose track of it.
No problem. Yes, if we can just make sure that we get some of those. I think members of the public are very interested to know, especially on the public safety ones.
Absolutely. We will certainly do that. And also one of the callers mentioned SB 18. That's a bill from Senator Skinner on hydrogen cells, and it was put on hold in the second house. Knowing the senator's office well, I expect something to be introduced next year. However, as the budget chair traditionally, and I can't speak for someone's office, but as a budget chair traditionally, their hands are very full, especially in years where we have a surplus, which is good. And you can see that their efforts on the budget ramp up, and some of their legislative efforts maybe could go kind of a little bit more average. However, that's not to say that there is not another proposal as it relates to hydrogen cells and vehicles and things of that nature. It was about green hydrogen and emissions of greenhouse gases specifically is what that bill does. The Senate traditionally has really pushed bills on reducing GHG and really on climate change. That is definitely something we see coming in 22, probably a stronger push than last year. I think there was some frustration, and now I'm kind of going off on a tangent. There's some frustration on the climate resiliency trailer bill that the money for forest firefighting was not as high as some expected. So I do know from speaking with many senators, assembly members, policy committee staff, and others, it's clear that the forest fires are only getting worse. We're knee deep in another drought, and we expect climate resiliency and policy topics along those lines to be probably front and center next year when bills get introduced.
Okay, thank you. I think if the council members don't mind, I think we'll go back out to the public for questions and comments on state legislation. If there's any comments or questions, so Madam Clerk.
Yes, ma'am. Anyone wishing to make public comments, please raise your hands. We have Winter Dellenbach. You can unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I was wanting to know about SB 16, not 18. SB 16 Skinner. So it's not moving forward. It's been made into a 2-year bill. I
No.
think that.
Sorry.
No?
SB 16 is on its way to the governor's desk. That's about the release of records for police officers.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Then could you, I'm sorry. AB 718 made into a 2-year bill. So how do you see that moving forward? And thank you for that correction. And also, and also with the amendments, that's perfectly acceptable. What I was getting to with the amendments wasn't so much step to step all of the journey of the amendments, but just then in the end where the bill landed in terms of where it is now after all of the amendments. That's what I was trying to say in its final form, what is the meaning of the bill. So if that is stated adequately, that would be perfectly fine by me. But I would like to know about AB 718 Skinner, what's going to happen to it now that it's a 2-year bill in your judgment.
Happy to. So AB, go ahead, Andres.
No, I was just going to chime in and say, so just to clarify for the committee and others, AB 718, while also having to do with peace officers, kind of a similar topic around, peace officer reform. That is a bill by Assemblymember Jordan Cunningham, who is out of the San Luis Obispo County area. That is separate from Senate Bill 16, which is a bill by Senator Nancy Skinner from Berkeley. Although they do both have to do with criminal justice system reform. To the caller as it relates to Assembly Bill 718 by Assemblymember Cunningham, as you stated, that is a 2-year bill now. It may be acted upon as soon as January 2022. I do not have the specifics currently as to why that was pulled. What I can say is that there were a number of pieces of police reform legislation that were halted for further discussion because there were already so many existing other bills on police reform that they did want to kind of consolidate, focus on a couple in 2021, and then revisit and focus on the subsequent ones in 2022. But as it pertains to the exact rhyme and reason why 718 was held as a 2-year bill, that is something that we would have to go back, chat with Assemblymember Cunningham and his staff on, and then get back to the city to give a full and well-rounded answer to that question. So I apologize that I'm not able to answer in terms of specifics at the moment, but that's certainly something we can delve into.
Thank you, and thank you for correcting that it was Cunningham and not Skinner. I actually had read that it was Skinner, so thank you for that correction.
Our pleasure.
No more public comments, Madam Clerk?
No, ma'am. That's the last comment.
Thank you. So we'll come back to Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the, very comprehensive update. It's a lot of work, so thank you guys. I wanted to understand a couple things. So first is around evictions. So can you kind of explain to me, at least from the state level point of view, what is the current eviction restrictions? And then how do you, reading the tea leaves, how do you see it going forward? I guess past October 1st.
So the eviction moratorium ends this month. I do not see a renewal for a couple of reasons. Primarily, session is over and they do not resume as a body until January. The main part of the eviction moratorium was allowing renters to stay within their units, but at the same time ensuring that they pay up to 25% of the rent and working with the property owners once everyone registers to access to state funding. So that's really the long and short of it. I do not see an extension. There is an overall sense from the Capitol, and I mean as a larger body, that as we move through COVID, more and more people are going back to work, more and more people are trying to get back on their footing, and that was something behind us, and there is not a sense to renew the eviction moratorium.
Okay, so in terms of the current moratorium, and I realize this is only a couple more weeks until its effect, but can you explain exactly how does the program work?
Can I say exactly how the program works?
Yeah.
If you give me a second or so, I'm happy to kind of go through some of our past memos and updates. The main thrust was really ensuring that landlords don't get sideways on mortgage payments and that tenants don't get kicked out on the street due to our large growing population of unhoused residents.
So basically, landlords will still get the rent from the state, and then the tenants didn't have to pay rent and or back rent, except for 25%. Is that?
There is, you would have to pay back rent. The goal is to get the tenants to pay up to 25% of what's existing now. But I want to be clear, you're not eligible unless you register with the state. Keep in mind, the state had a bit of an embarrassment through the EDD unemployment program. And so they learned a lot from that to make sure we need to have checks and balances. And if you're a property owner or a tenant, you have to register with the state and sign various agreements in order to have access to those funds. Once you do that, and you have access through those funds, you primarily work through your counties or the state to apply and then to receive the funds.
So the landlord could still get full rent. Is that the way it worked?
That is the goal, is that they would have a long runway for the landlords to get paid back.
Okay, so the current program, the landlord gets full rent and the renter only pays 25%. Is that how the program worked?
No, first of all, you got to register.
Mhm.
And the goal is to have the tenants pay at least 25% now,
Okay.
and know that you're getting the state funds. Then you pay what's owed from your back rent, and then you get up to what's current.
Okay. So
there's still state help. There's rent assistance, but the tenant has to pay at least 25% now and then they would have applied for the remaining funds through the state assistance program. And so no matter what, the landlord will get his full rent, maybe at a delayed time.
Oh, I
Correct.
see. Okay, I see. Okay, great. It's great having a realtor here. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Okay, but I was trying to understand how it worked. I see. Okay. And so does that also cover utilities, or is that just rent?
Great question. This is just rent.
Just rent.
That's a
Okay.
good question. In the climate resiliency bill that I was talking about, there was a provision to help pay back past payments for your water bills.
I see. Okay. Okay. And so does this impact anyone's credit score?
Good question. I do not know that.
Okay. Okay. And does a tenant ever have to pay back the rent like that? Like the same 5% that they did? Do they need to pay it back eventually?
Correct. Yes, they do.
Oh, I see. They have to pay it back to the state.
No. The state hands out the money to the counties. It sits in a bank. The tenants apply for what's back rent and what's future, and they have to pay that to the landlords.
No, but I'm saying, so the tenant's only paying 25% of the rent. The rest of it's coming from the county or state, right? So does a tenant ever need to make up the rent again?
Yes, and that's why they would apply to the program to pay what's owed.
Councilmember Tanaka, are you asking, say, for example, the tenant paid their 25%,
Yeah.
they have assistance money from the state for 75%.
Yeah.
Are you asking, does the tenant have to repay that 75%
Yeah.
to the state?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Okay. That makes
This
sense.
is part of the,
Okay.
Councilmember Tanaka, part of the funds came from the federal government, which what David Hines talked about.
Okay.
And also part of the funding came from the state surplus.
Okay. Understood. And so even if we have the resurgence of COVID like we're having right now, the way you read the tea leaves is that this kind of program would not happen again.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So you're reading the tea leaves. I think you said earlier you don't see like a program like this happening again if like right now Delta variant's kind of peaking up right now, right? You don't see this program being in effect again.
Not at this time. No, I do not.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. And then the virtual meeting. Oh, by the way, in terms of the eviction, are you guys doing any advocacy one way or the other on this?
On which?
On the evictions? Is there any advocacy one way or the other you guys are
We
doing?
definitely worked hard on that. We worked really hard to make sure that both landlords and tenants had access to funding. But that respectfully was back in about April or May. The eviction work, we've definitely have reached out to legislators and leadership to see if there is an appetite to extend it, and there is not.
Okay. But so at this point going forward, there's no advocacy one way or the other you guys are doing?
For eviction, correct.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay. And then and I guess if you were, we would have to count the vote on that again or something like that, I assume.
To
I'm not
take
sure
an
if,
official city of Palo Alto position, correct, you all would have to give us direction.
okay, understood. Okay. And okay, in regards to the virtual meeting, so we have like, I don't know, 4 people in attendance now. Normally for these kind of committee meetings, nobody attends. So I think it's actually kind of cool that we are able to leverage technology. It also has, allow us to reduce our greenhouse gas, allow staff not to have to drive home super late at night, right? Incredible participation from the community, much more diverse than we ever got before. And so I think that's been a real big positive for the community. And so from what you're saying, it sounds like this can only be done as an emergency. So we would, as a council, have to declare a state of emergency and vote on it every month. Is that what I heard, or did I miss something?
So close. In terms of voting on it continuously every 30 days to essentially reestablish, locally and attest locally that there is still, an emergency and that proper precautions need to be taken. That's what a city would need to do. But it is only under a state authorized state of emergency in which these modified Brown Act provisions could be implemented at a local level. So long as there's a state of emergency, whether it be for COVID, whether it be for, a tremendous wildfire season, what have you, then a local jurisdiction is eligible to implement these provisions if signed into law, and then would just have to attest locally every 30 days or in a lesser period of time that is in fact the case.
Okay. Okay, so I guess on that, I think that we want to embrace technology. I think this is my personal view, and I think eventually as a council we probably would have to vote on this, but I think we want to advocate for the continued use of technology like this. I think it's a net benefit positive for most people, and so I for one would like to see this. For us to be able to use technology, I think probably staff would appreciate it as well. And I know members of the public certainly appreciate not having to sit around in chamber all night to talk for 2 minutes, right? So I think there's a lot of benefits all around for this. Also like just from the point of view of the city, people are talking about spending $3 million improving chamber, we spruce up our chamber to make it fancier. We don't have to do that now, right? We're mainly doing Zoom. So I think I for one want to really push pretty hard on that. And I think you guys, at least in your report, it looks like you guys are trying to push towards allowing more virtual meetings. But I think given that it's 2021, I think we should definitely move in that direction versus trying to go back to, back when the Brown Act existed, when there weren't really computers, there was no internet, back before we go back to the, before computer age, right? The BC age, right? So how likely do you see this happening if you were to read the tea leaves? How likely do you see the continuation? Because it seems like it's a bit bumpy right now from what you're saying.
And one
Yes.
clarification, sorry, Andreas, to jump into. So given the way that the bill is stated, it will allow us to, if signed by the governor, of course, would allow us to have some version of the virtual meetings that we're having right now. But staff has been working very diligently to allow for hybrid meetings to take place. So if there were a need, say that the city council has to determine that every 30 days, whether or not there's the ability for us to still need to meet virtually. If we have any iteration that morphs that, where we would need to have some in-person meetings, staff has been working pretty diligently to allow us to be able to have hybrid meetings. And so that does require some work on the council chambers, and our IT staff and others have been pretty intensely working on that. So just clarifying that the actual physical infrastructure space is still important, especially if the declarations don't happen exactly as this legislation allows for. So there's an important aspect there.
Sorry, Chantel, maybe I wasn't very clear. I guess, hybrid meetings are nice, but I still think like meetings like this, where we can all be virtual, actually is quite useful to the community. Because I know, like, for instance, our old city clerk would have to drive from, like, I don't know, from Timbuktu, right, to come here, right? And that's like kind of a hardship. But anyways, I would.
Councilmember Tanaka, also, I think it's still, even with the AB 361, it's still under emergency situations. So I think what you're leading to is something of more permanency, and that's a completely different topic. I don't think that is part of the discussion at this time on any of that. If that's something of interest, I think that perhaps that takes a lot bigger, bigger considerations from Sacramento. But right now, the one that we're talking about is pertaining to still emergencies, but now a locality can declare it. I think it's two different topics.
I guess
So
I'm just talking about in terms of the overall
right.
and federal policy legislation topic, which is I for one, and of course, we as a council, we have to vote on this, but I would advocate for that. But I would love to hear your response, Andreas, in terms of like, what do you see? How do you see a more permanent form of this going forward? How do you see that shaking up in Sacramento?
Yeah, that's a great.
You can speak to maybe Bill 703 as well. That was one the city weighed in on that was broader, but isn't currently moving. Sorry.
Exactly. So Councilmember Tanaka, as it relates to what we can foresee coming, down the pipe, whether it be in 2022 or in a subsequent legislative session, there's certainly been conversations around, potential legislation which would enable, meetings to be held virtually kind of under any circumstance. Whether or not those conversations have actual weight or legs, or, if there's a true appetite within the administration or legislative leadership, that's a little bit harder to say. And I would lean towards the side of, at the moment, there's not necessarily a massive appetite for that, because from our conversations, the general sentiment from people in Sacramento is that while they want to employ the benefits of online meetings and Zoom and virtual rooms when appropriate, there is also a sentiment that folks would like to get back into a normal routine. So what I'm saying is that I'm just kind of laying out the general sentiment from what Nicolo and I see in the halls in Sacramento every day. And so, long story short, there's the opportunity for there to be legislation that you're referring to in the future, whether it be in, is that going to be in 2022? I'd say that's more doubtful. But as Chantal alluded to, Assembly Bill 703 by Assemblymember Blanca Rubio, that bill would have sort of, done in part what AB 361 is striving to do, but also modify Brown Act requirements relating to, posting requirements and other items, as well as just the ability to teleconference virtually, but during a non-emergency setting. So, for example, wouldn't necessarily have to be during a state of emergency, such as Assembly Bill 361. So, and conversations on Assembly Bill 703, as well as other, policy ideas that aren't necessarily bills yet, those exist, and those are something that Nicolo and I will always make sure to convey to Ms. Gaines and the city manager's office, so that it can be, appropriately conveyed to council and others. So when those conversations arise and when Nicolo and I are part of those conversations, we'll be sure to let the city know. But for the time being, that's not really something that's on the table. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. And one last thing before I end here. I think the posting thing is also, a very, very antiquated thing that we have to do right now, which makes little sense at all. So that also really should go away and be modernized with what's really going on. So, but anyways, I think you understand that. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Our pleasure.
Thank you, Councilmember Stone. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Just a couple more questions, because several of my questions have been answered by my two other colleagues. So it looks like Congress has really kind of given up on reforming qualified immunity for police officers. Is the legislature in Sacramento continuing to review that issue? I mean, there's several police reform that I saw in here, but didn't see anything about qualified immunity.
That initially was in Senate Bill 2 and essentially got watered down. There was definitely that bill, which was a great bill that the city supported, was wide. And as it went through the legislative process, it was thinned out a little bit, but qualified immunity continues to be a point of discussion. And how does that impact not only the officers, but the municipalities that employ them too?
Okay, thank you. Disappointing, but not too surprising. And then looking at kind of following the returns, it's looking good for Governor Newsom to be able to stay in office. Do we anticipate more of the controversial bills that were sitting on his desk to now kind of more easily move, kind of move forward with his signature once the election is over, and assuming he wins the recall? I mean, more specifically, do you think the governor is more likely to sign SB 9? I know he was hesitant and he never declared his position on it during the campaign, but I suspect that was more of a campaign strategy than anything else. So are we kind of anticipating some changes starting tomorrow?
That is a great question. And from the people we've spoken to, primarily his legislative deputies, they look at each bill case by case. And they look at the merits and what have you. I professionally believe that he will be signing SB 9 and SB 10 because something that he said over the years is we need more housing. He has put the governor, the legislature, they've put a significant investment in homelessness. And one thing that we hear constantly is part of homelessness is the need for more housing. So if you look at past comments and if you look at statements he said a year ago or 2 years ago, I suspect that he does sign SB 9 and SB 10, and he continues to push for more of kind of wholesale changes on how we address homelessness and the unsheltered population. Something that's also we've spoken with the city about and others is the administration with all these new homeless dollars are really pressing hard on performance measures and standards. With all the money coming to cities and counties, they're expecting some really good performance measures in year 3. The administration has also been very clear they aren't big supporters of temporary congregate shelter. And if you do that, they want to know what's your path to permanent supportive housing. So Home Key is great. It's a great start. But they've always been really, really clear on, okay, so what's your plan to put permanent roofs over people's heads? I also want to take a quick second Councilmember Tanaka, I misspoke. Part of the rent relief does address utilities. So my grandmother raised me that if you say something wrong, you better correct yourself. So I had to correct myself on that one. But yeah, I do suspect he signs 9, he signs 10, he signs some of the other housing production bills. Also, as it relates to future Brown Act bills or what have you, remember, keep in mind, there was beginning of this year, there was an edict that there is a cap or a restriction on bills moving forward. So I would say usually without a COVID year, meaning when the committee hearings function normally, when people can go in and out of the building, you see some really ambitious proposals. We saw some ambitious proposals this year, but not to the normal level that we see.
Yeah, I suspect you're going to have a very busy year next year. So enjoy your holidays.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I suspect you're right. And then just kind of one final question for staff. I appreciate Councilmember Tanaka bringing up the eviction moratorium. Really concerning to hear your kind of prognostic that it's not going to be continued, and it looks like that will not be the case. So I'm curious for staff, and this is a really short window, is there time to draft an emergency local eviction moratorium for council to pass prior to that eviction moratorium expiring at the end of the month? I mean, what's the process that council can do, and what this committee can maybe do tonight to recommend that? Or yeah, and I know that's not agendized, but wondering kind of like what is it that we
Yeah, the second question is easier, and you did put your finger on it, council member, that a new city initiative is not on your agenda tonight. So that would be something that a council member could pair with another council member and propose to your colleagues through a colleague memo. That's how we've traditionally done that. I haven't given any thought to a new local residential eviction moratorium, and I would want to do some research on that. My concern would be in the absence of any similar type of activity at the county level or any other local government, and obviously at the state level, whether we might, given the length of time that eviction moratoriums have been in place, be pushing up against some constitutional rights of property owners. So I would want to research that and other procedural issues. But if that's something that council asks us to work on through a colleague memo, then we'll go ahead and do that research and be able to advise you about whether that's available or not.
Okay, so you really need that colleagues memo before being able to start on that process.
Yes, I mean, the council has, that's a fairly big work item.
Yeah.
And not least because I would think that council would want to do some significant community outreach. That kind of issue has big impact, of course, on renters, but also on property owners who are also our constituents and residents, especially small property owners. So I would imagine there would want to be some significant community outreach to explore that and inform council about the policy issues, as well as my office doing the legal work. So we don't launch into that until a majority of council tells us that the new initiative is something that they want us to work on.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And yeah, and I think unfortunate, no blame on any individual person, but unfortunate that I feel like this happens so often in government at all levels that we kind of always running up to the deadline, and then all of a sudden the alarm bells go off, and we're scrambling to find a solution. So I definitely think something worthy of council looking into. And then just kind of final thought. Glad to hear all the various funding that seems to be available for unhoused services and possibly for affordable housing as well. So just hope that staff continues to do the great work that they do and follow up on any of those leads. I think makes absolute every sense for us to supplement our housing strategies with trying to take advantage of a lot of this funding, and kind of my understanding from the presentation tonight, it seems like that's that's a bit unprecedented, at least as far as recent years of this level of funding. So let's take advantage of that and kind of pursue all paths that could lead to some of that funding. Those are all my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Council Member. It's also, for me, it's also unfortunate that, the state haven't kind of given it a little bit more time after all, we're still in some sort of emergency. And so they should be thinking about extending the eviction moratorium, really should be thinking about that. On the other matter, I just wanted to say quickly is on the letters, I want to thank you for writing the letters to the governor on some of the bills that we have supported or opposed. I think on SB 9, since he is likely, as you said, that he will sign it, that one of the amendments is revising the 1-year residency requirement and they've changed it now to 3 years, right, for people that are going to split the lots. But I think that it needs to be stated also that to do all that work, it's going to take about 3 years to split the lot, to get the permits, entitlements, and no, they wouldn't have to get all of that, right? But they do need to do the work. And it's going to take about 3 years for them to build the houses, and they wouldn't have to, during that time, they can say they're living there. And so in essence, they really have not lived there. And it's going to be a house that is just going to be speculation, and they're going to sell it or do something else. The other thing, I think it's also the other amendment that they did specially so that one of the congressionals could sign it, is to say that the building official has to make a written finding that there is a preponderance of evidence that the housing is going to be affecting a safety or a physical impact, right? But if it's in a single family neighborhood, there's very little chance, unless it's sitting on a toxic land, that there's going to be a finding. So again, that is a that part of it is just a filler, and it seems nonsensical. And I think that, to say that it's a duplex bill is actually very misleading, because they're not mentioning the ADU or the JADU that is already allowed by right. So most likely it's going to be four units on that one lot, or if it's subdivided, then a total of 8 lots, eight units on the originally one lot, now split into 2. And, people are going to find out that they're living when they're buying a single family home, now they're living next door to a apartment building that doesn't have enough parking. So I think some of these things, I hope that you will add in there. I wanted to ask about SB 10. Has the language in there that states that local city councils will get the authority to override voter approved ballot initiatives? Is that there was the language in there where should the citizens have an initiative, city council could override that initiative or referendum. Is that language still in SB 10?
It is still in SB 10. That is one of the provisions that we did look at closely and have several discussions with the author's office on, specifically about that ability. They did amend it one fold to state that instead of just a majority vote, it would need to be a super majority to overturn that, or in order to do that, in order to overturn a voter approved initiative against zoning. Nonetheless, there was not an appetite from the author nor the overall legislature in either house to truly push that provision out, so that a local jurisdiction does not have authority to override that voter approved initiative. So while that was one of the topics that we did focus on and worked on and had discussions on several times over, it just wasn't something that there was an appetite for in the legislature. So as is the bill in its current form, that's how it's going to be presented to the governor for his consideration.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that's very important that we do state that to the governor. It is a removal of citizens' rights and for them to, and the democratic process. I think it's very, very hostile to voters and to their civil rights. But I don't want to take up any more of your time, and we have another very big agenda item. I want to thank you both for being here today and answering our questions and helping us understand these complex bills.
Our
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
Yeah, balls in our court to get started on the signature and veto letters, and we'll work with the city manager's office to get that done ASAP. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Have a
Thank you,
good
everyone.
night.
You also.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go on to, so our item number 2, agenda item number 2, which is Office of the City Auditor presentation of the IT Risk Management Audit Activity Report has been moved to next month. And so we'll go straight to item number 3, which is update on recent race and equity work since March, including an update on a records management system, contract for police data collection, and provide any recommendations to council on the city's race and equity work. Ms. Gaines, take it away.
Thank you. I always struggle with going into full screen, sorry. Okay, here we go. Good evening, Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager, and being cognizant of time, we're going to move quickly through this. There's a lot of information, and we do have the chair of the HRC, Mr. Coloma Smith, who will be giving a piece of the presentation. So this is an update on race and equity work since our last time with the committee, which was in June 2020. So quick overview, we'll talk about remaining tasks, completed tasks. We'll talk about demographics for boards, committees, and commissions. We'll talk about the Summit on Women and Girls and the HRC 100 Community Conversations. Okay, the City Council in November 2020 gave staff and itself as City Council about 17 tasks to work on related to race and equity. 11 have been completed. And so the 6 I will show here are just the remaining. So the first has to do with the records management system. There's an extensive update in the staff report, but essentially the go live date estimated right now is early December. It was pushed back about a week or 2. We are coordinating with Los Altos and Mountain View for that project and working out the kinks together. The estimated go live date is December 1st, and we are excited for staff that are working very diligently on that. The second item related to the RIPA stop data reports. We have been working in the police department, and we have reps here that are actually doing the work. I'm using the universal we that are practicing entering information into the Department of Justice website for what's required for the Records Information Police Reporting Act, RIPA. And they are, I killed that acronym, but it is in the staff report as well. But they're practicing that task so that when the system goes live in December, that they are then able to have the muscle memory in place for when our real data will be required to be our starting point, which is January 2022. So we're in a pretty good place on that, with staff having practice runs and trainings to help them enter the information into the DOJ system, which will help us later when we're trying to do the stop data reports. So all of that's related to Directive C. D, on the Santa Clara County PERT program. So there's the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team program, as well as the Mobile Crisis Response Team program. And the county has been working on a form of a CAHOOTS type program. I mentioned all 3, it's acronym soup, but it's very important to mention them. We have been working diligently with the county for a while to get a PERT resource to the city. The county has made a lot of progress in this regard and has hired a clinician that will be focused in Palo Alto. We locally have also chosen the officer that will be working with that clinician for the team that are running around as our PERT resource. The county is working on the memorandum of understanding, and we are awaiting that as staff. But still, that is very, very good progress on that program from the last few times that we've had an update on it. The MCRT program remains as it was, it's still a resource to our community. And then the last one on the CAHOOTS type program, the county's program, the Community Mobile Response Program. And they have renamed it, branded it. It's now called the Trust Program. That stands for something. It's in the staff report. So most importantly, they are doing the RFP so that they can get a provider for the 3 county sites. As you recall, Palo Alto's advocacy really led the county to include a program in the North County area to serve Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, Mountain View, and Palo Alto. And as David spoke of in the last item, we also requested money at the federal level for a type of program like that. And we're progressing in that federal earmark request. So if we receive those funds, we are looking to augment the program that the county is bringing to Palo Alto. So the last 3 is including use of force information in the regular supplemental report submitted to the city council as a cover memo to each IPA report. Because of the expanded scope of the IPA contract, there's not an official supplemental report anymore. Most of the items that were covered in the supplemental report are now in the IPA's actual scope of services. So that leaves this information about all uses of force, similar to the report that we released last June, that we will just do an annual use of force report release to the council. And Assistant Chief Bender can speak to that. But our plan for the comprehensive report to come out to the public and the council will be January 2022. So we have a full calendar year plus the remainder of 2020. Item K, returning with parameters related to the Peace Officers Association negotiations. That will start a few months before that contract opens up. So that contract opens up in 2022. So there will be opportunity for further discussion in 2022, but some of the parameters you set in place this year with other bargaining units will also apply. Lastly, directing staff in coordination with our overall DEI efforts to do a demographic assessment as a baseline for all of our workforce. We have been working on this. We're getting pieces in place, I would say, to get proper data collecting system in place for our demographic information. We're realizing that some of the tools that we have on this are could be improved in order for us to get adequate proper data together for workforce demographics. So that is where we are on that and working on collecting more accurate data. And then the information I'll share with you soon is on the boards and commissions. We also collected demographic information through a survey on our board and commission members, and I'll go through that quickly. So completed tasks, things like adopting the mission statement, updating the police policy manual and frequently updating it online, making sure the most recent copies posted online, amending the independent police auditor's contract, advocating on police reform, conducting a summit on women and girls. Minka will speak to you a little bit more about that, and also working on the CAHOOTS type program for Palo Alto. So a lot of great work has been done. I think if there's anything you should walk away from about these 17 tasks is that a lot of progress is being made and we're continuing to work diligently on the remaining tasks. Okay, shifting gears to boards and commissions. I think there are about 5 slides here. In the staff report, there's all of the data summarized by each question in the survey, but I just put out a couple high-level nuggets to share with the committee and the public today. So there were 34 people who responded to the survey, and that's about 69% of all board and commission members. So it's pretty good in terms of overall response rate. How many years have you lived in Palo Alto? As you can see here, most people have been in Palo Alto for quite some time. I think it's over, my Zoom bar is in the way, so I'm moving it. But over 70% have been in Palo Alto for 21 years or more. Going into whether they are renters or owners and gender, we offered, I'll go to gender first. We offered a variety of options for people to choose from. I think there was male, female, and then non-binary and an other. So just pointing out that we did not limit responses to male and female, but the people who responded, it ended up being 50-50 choosing male or female. So just clarifying, because this chart would make you think that we didn't make it more open for responses, and that was not the case. In terms of renting, owning, and other, 85% of the respondents to the survey are owners in Palo Alto. And then, as you can see, 12% are renters. And there was one who said that they were not a Palo Alto resident. Age group, we have 47% that said they're age 60 and above. And then if you pull those that are between ages 40 and 59, that's another 35% of our board and commission members. Race and ethnicity. We display the information this way just so also you can see the answer options that were available, and we allowed participants to pick as many races or ethnicities that apply to them. I just want to make sure that's clear, because that's one of the changes that I think is relevant in newer demographic surveys, is not limiting participants to picking just one race. But the results, as you can see, 9% identify as Asian, 6% Hispanic or Latino, 3% multiracial, 71% white, and 12% decline to state. And the other groups show as 0% representation. The only crosstab that we looked at as a broader crosstab is we had a question on the survey that asked if they were a member of a quasi-judicial board or commission. And the quasi-judicial we defined, so don't worry, it wasn't left that broadly, but it was the Planning Transportation Commission, Architectural Review Board, and the Historic Resources Board. And 11 respondents identified that they were members of those commissions. And of those responding members, 73% have been in Palo Alto for over 16 years. 64% of those respondents are white. 64% of respondents are male. 100% of the respondents on the quasi-judicial board said that they were homeowners. And 45% of the respondents are age 60 or above. So as I mentioned, the rest of the information is in the staff report. If there are further questions on it or wanting to slice and dice the data more, we of course will be able to speak to that. But wanted to share this information with the committee so we know where we are in terms of baseline information on our boards and commissions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Minka to speak about the Summit on Women and Girls.
Thank you, Chantal. If we can go to the first slide. The next slide, please. Thank you. So Minka, Office of Human Services. I'm happy to be here today to give a quick overview of the Summit on Women and Girls. It was held earlier in the summer, and it was my pleasure to work on this event along with my city colleagues and a committee of community members, of which Councilmember Koo was a member of that. So a shout out to Councilmember Koo, and also a thank you to her for serving on one of the breakout session panels along with Councilmember Cormack. So in regards to the event, we had a great keynote speaker, Lori McKenzie from Stanford University, who spoke on the effect of COVID on women, and especially looking at that from an intersectional lens. Heard from many attendees that that was the highlight of the event. We had about 70 people attend, a very broad section of the community, which we were glad to see. And they were able to choose, we had 5 breakout panels, 5 topics, and they could go to 2 of the 5. So we held the same 5 panels twice. So they got a real sense of hearing from our local panels that were experts on the topics that were discussed. So the real reason for the event was to get the pulse on what was happening with women and girls in the community and report that back to you as Policy and Services Committee. So we did that in a variety of ways. We had the breakout sessions, and you'll see those notes in the staff report, and also a jam board activity to get to the heart of the matter, is such as the critical issues facing women and girls, ideas to address those issues, and ideas for collaboration, because we were very clear all along that we wanted any work or any progress made on equity for women and girls to be a community effort. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there were 6 key areas of need that were identified by the panelists and by the attendees, and I'll just quickly go over them. Affordable housing, especially as it affects women in particular, and especially single mothers. CDAW ordinance. We heard from many of the attendees that there was a strong interest to pass a local CDAW ordinance. Childcare, and childcare from the perspective of the providers and the challenges they're facing, but also as a tool for women's economic recovery, the importance of childcare. And you will be hearing from the city's Early Care and Education Committee on October 4th. They'll be presenting directly to the full council. Next slide, please. The last three areas are recreation and sports, and defying the myth that there's there's full equity in women in sports. Our presenters let us know that there's still a great disparity in opportunities for women and girls. And I think one of the statistics in the reports that I thought was amazing, that like 94% of the women who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies played sports as youth. Representation, Chantal responded to that a little in the survey, but attendees wanted to see greater representation both in elected and non-elected positions, and had some ideas on how to address that. And lastly, our girls and teens in our community. And I want to let you know, just like Chantal did earlier, we had a very broad definition of women and girls, and we're very inclusive of that intentionally with the summit. So we've all heard how challenging COVID has been on teens, and I'm sure Councilmember Stone could attest to that as an educator. But we had a great panel of local teens that really shared their challenges during COVID, but they're just their challenges overall. Last slide, please. So we took these key areas of needs and then translated them into areas of consideration for policy and services to give some feedback back to staff. And I'll just quickly note those here. The first is we look for ways to make progress, and again, to get your feedback. Regarding affordable housing, we thought a good next step would be to share the results of the summit with the city's housing element working group, since that is very active now, and thought that would be appropriate. We are seeking feedback on any initial work to give staff in regards to an ordinance addressing the topics of the United Nations CEDAW initiative. Seeking feedback on whether the city should conduct a review of our recreation services programs along with the Parks and Rec Commission in order to better understand program and service equity. Taking those findings from the girls and teens focus group and sharing that with our teen advisory group, as they have been incredibly active on working on both programming and policy issues in the city. And lastly, there was a real feeling of the attendees and an interest in hosting an activity on an ongoing basis or an annual basis to see like an annual summit on women and girls. So that's my quick overview. I'd like to pass it on to Chair Smith, and also present is former Vice Chair Valerie Stinger to give you a quick update on an initiative I know you've heard about, the 100 Conversations on Race. They're going to give you an overview of it with the hope of giving a full presentation to council. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Binka, and thank you so much, Policy and Service Committee, for allowing us to present this evening. I would like to talk about the 100 Community Conversations about Race, which was, I feel, a very successful and important initiative that we did this spring. Next slide, please. The goals were to provide opportunities for honest conversation for people who usually do not have the opportunity to talk about race. What we did in the working theory was we wanted to focus on the dominant population in Palo Alto and have them have dialogue around race. So instead of bringing those that are from minority groups into rooms and putting them on the spot to start talking about race, we wanted to reach out to folks and have them reach to their peers and have peer-based discussions about race. What we found here is we had 33 conversations recorded, 212 people participated. These conversations were 1.5 to 2 hours. The sample was diverse, but it was very much not the full spectrum in the city. Next slide, please. But what we found stunning, and I think this is the one thing that was stunning to me, was approximately 30% of the participants had not had a conversation about race in Palo Alto before. It was very interesting that the self-selecting group, a full third of them, had never had serious dialogue about this. Issues of racism compounded by increasing economic disparity and a lost sense of place and belonging for many Palo Altans. Although our population skewed significantly white and significantly older and significantly female, one of the critical things that we heard were that they felt like they didn't belong to this community as it is today, which was a very interesting thing. The other thing is white privilege, which so frames the lived experience of Black and Brown Palo Alto, is barely understood by the dominant local population. White privilege is very nuanced. There are actually examples of bias and unintended behaviors that come from white privilege. It is not a sensationalized word where it is a damnation of somebody, but it is a statement of facts and privileges that people have. And people get very scared around the word and never look at the research behind it. And these conversations prove it. Next slide, please. So where do we go forward? To enhance inclusion and a sense of belonging, focus on areas that were identified for further exploration, which I described a little bit above. We want the HRC to continue to convene community partnerships and conversations. One of the things that as the chair of the HRC, that I'm incredibly proud of was the fact that we looped in PAUSD, the library. We had several civic organizations engaged, several high school organizations engaged. We had the folks from Stanford and the Stanford Impact Lab engaged. So we had a broad coalition of community stakeholders that were engaged. So we want to continue that. We also want to propose that belonging as a city priority for 2022. A priority would allow for a deeper dive into questions such as, what does it mean to belong? How is belonging manifested in a community? Does belonging mean something different to different age or population segments? Who in our city feel they don't belong or no longer belong? What do I need to do? Next slide, please. And then finally, it's amazing. After we had a great team of volunteers go through the data, and this is from a 70-page report, so there's a lot of anecdotal stuff in there, but this is one of the things. The conversations were described as rich, encouraging, and profound. One of the conveners of the conversation says participants appreciated the opportunity for a serious discussion. The report and the follow-through are anticipated. We have a group of individuals in the city that are engaged and want to see this continue. The key now is for the HRC to actually roll the output into an executive summary of findings and to use that to create and drive a change agenda. Let's get this done. Thank you so much.
And that concludes our presentation. Chair Koo, I know there's about 4 different topics, so however you would like to organize the question and answer, we are available.
Well, first, I want to thank everybody to the presenters. Thank you for all your work. I did go back and listen to a meeting from the HRC. It was a very lively discussion and presentation. And of course, to Minka and to your team, I just want to say thank you for a very successful summit for women and girls. So I think when we go back, we'll first go to the public, and then when we come back, we'll go through each of the topics that was presented today. So first we'll go with the directives, and then we'll go to the Women's Summit, and then to HRC. So if Madam Clerk, you can see if there's any comments from the general public.
Yes, ma'am. If you'd like to make a public comment on this item, please use the raise your hand feature. Okay, Sherrill Spencer, you can unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
So good evening, councillors. I'm Cheryl Spencer. I'm a longtime resident of Palo Alto, and I'm a member of the Cities for CEDAW Coalition. And we are a Palo Alto branch of this nationwide coalition. I don't see my timing going down. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I attended the Women and Girls Summit on the 12th of June, and I thank the city staff and the organizing committee for producing an interesting and productive event. I'm speaking up for the second issue identified by staff of the 5 issues that you just heard about, which they think the City Council should consider, namely that additional work on an ordinance based on CEDAW be initiated. In fact, the council moved on the 1st of October 2018, that's nearly 3 years ago, that such work should be started, and our coalition cannot understand why 3 years later it still hasn't been started. I see in a different section of tonight's report that a workforce demographic assessment is a remaining staff work assignment. And such a workforce assessment is the first step in the process of writing a CEDAW ordinance. So our coalition pleads with the council and its staff to get started on this long-awaited ordinance. And if you do a good workforce demographic assessment, that will be a good first step towards understanding what isn't right in the equality of women and men within the city workforce. And therefore you can work out what should go into an ordinance that would help the city gain its goals of a more equitable community. And I thank you for listening to me once again about this. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you for your comments. If anyone else wishes to speak on this item, please raise your hand now. There are no further requests to speak.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll bring it back to the committee. I think Councilmember Tanaka had to jump off for a call. He'll be back when he finishes. So Councilmember Stone, you have any comments, questions?
Yeah, so starting with the
Directives from council,
sorry?
from the directives,
Okay, yeah, perfect.
work assignments, right?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first I just want to thank staff, especially you, Ms. Gaines, really on just the incredible work and advocacy that you've put in over the past year on this. And this was a huge lift, and in a very short amount of time, and during such a crazy year, and being short-staffed, and so many requirements being placed on all of you professionally, as well as having to deal with your own personal lives and family issues and everything through this pandemic, and the fact that we have accomplished so many of the things that was that was kind of placed on your desks is really an accomplishment, and especially to the last minute advocacy on kind of some of these mental health resources for Palo Alto, and being able to advocate for so many of these services coming to North County is really, I think, a testament to all of your skills and tireless advocacy. This has been a frustration of mine for years, and especially when I was serving on the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission, how frequently Palo Alto and North County are, don't want to say forgotten, but just not provided the level of resources that we see elsewhere in the county. So it's a true testament to your work, and I really do appreciate that. So I do want to kind of jump in here with a a few questions. Do we know the demographics of our own sworn police officers? And if not, are there efforts underway to, I mean, I know there are efforts underway for that. When will we know that information if we don't know it already?
We are including the police department in the analysis of all staff. In terms of timing, we are trying to assess what we will, like when that information will be put together far enough to bring along to council. We'll be doing it through opening it up to staff to be able to provide their information to us. So for example, the information that we have is based off someone's chosen race, gender, etc., time of hire. And as we know, people may want to change any of their identifications through or identities over time. And the information is just not as accurate as it could be. So in terms of timing, our first step is to refresh that information. And that will be critical for us being able to report out accurate information as a baseline.
Okay, I understood. And yeah, do you envision sort of, I know right earlier, well, just a few months ago, or earlier this year, everything's kind of blending together how crazy this year has been. We put an investment into kind of recruiting more and really investing in a more diverse fire department and working on on those issues. Are there kind of similar plans for doing something similar for our police department, assuming we may see, if we end up seeing kind of similar demographics as we did with the fire department? I know the fire department required kind of the civil grand jury report to come out, but would like to maybe be a little more proactive on this.
Oh, actually, yes, Rumi, I was going to mention your name there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. This is Rumi Portillo, HR Director, Chief People Officer. Yes, as you may know, we've been on a hiring freeze and that have affected citywide and in particular in the police department and fire department, we've actually lost positions there. So the hiring activity has been we've been in an anomaly period. We're coming out of that now. We are anticipating some hiring and we did receive some support through the budget for the fire department to specifically support extended outreach. The police department already undertakes quite a bit of effort in their recruiting program to conduct outreach. And there are plans to continue and try different efforts. It's a very, very difficult market. And it is a time that, we were experiencing difficulties with the candidate market. And since that time, there has definitely been, it's exacerbated in terms of people questioning their interest in going into the law enforcement field. And so recruiting is even more difficult than it's ever been. But we are definitely looking at expanded outreach, looking at technology to assist us with expanding our circle of influence. And it's something that is one of the highest priorities for the department.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. On another question, what regarding kind of like the RMS and the RIPA data, what purpose does the RMS information serve to really kind of further equity within law enforcement and kind of to further serve justice? I mean, how is that being used in that way, or how will that be used?
Captain Wagner.
Yes, Councilmember Stone, let me jump in on that one. So the records management program, we have had a very, very old system for a long period of time. And our new program has much better data capturing and reporting capabilities. So we're excited once we get that online by December 1st, to be able to more easily bring forth data to the many questions the public has about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that's actually very exciting. As it comes to race and equity, there is a module on our records management system which can directly link to the Department of Justice reporting. And so that module gives us the ability to have better accountability for making sure officers are having to do that data collection on certain types of stops. So that is the benefit of this records management system.
Thanks, Captain Wagner. And I'm curious, does that then become public within a certain amount of time, that information? Is there a public portal for the public to be able to see that information? I'm concerned because I think accountability is key here, but it's also, I think, also important for the public to be able to have access to this information so people can feel that they kind of have a sense of ownership in that, of that accountability. So do we know yet? Have we worked out those details yet?
Well, the Department of Justice is going to begin the official collection of data for our size department on January 1st, 2022. But that information will not be reportable or reported until actually April 1st of 2023. So per the law as it was written, AB 953, it's a year's worth of data. So you can go and look at larger agencies and see what types of, like your San Jose Police Departments, such, or county agencies, and see how they have been reporting. But for our size agency, it really won't be available for full dissemination till, again, April 1st, 2023.
Right, but sorry.
I was just going to add, Councilmember Stone, it also gives us the opportunity to have any sort of research or further analysis done on our stop data. So we've had an annual stop data report done in years past, and just reporting out on the information that our local department does. And this is an updated version of that with better information based off of the state law, which is where RIPA came from. And I think even with us working with Stanford Spark and others as an example, we have the opportunity for further analysis to give us some recommendations if there are things that could be improved within the department.
Perfect, thank you. That's all helpful. Next question, where are we? I didn't see any mention of it in the report, and it's been a little while, I think, since we've got an update on this. Where are we on the status of police radio encryption?
Captain Wagner, do you want to give just a high level?
Yes, certainly. So as I believe council did request and receive the documentation from the Department of Justice, we sent a communication back in March that asked specifically, would it be okay if we went back to our old method of broadcasting on an unencrypted channel? On July 2021, specifically July 2nd, they sent a communication back to us saying that we cannot revert back to the previous way we were doing business because we had the capability of protecting that personal identifying information via encryption. We had the technology available. So they effectively shut us down from making a change back. So that is where we stand. We are compliant with the law because we need to be in order to access these criminal justice databases. And so as far as the radio encryption, it's an active law. We need to comply with it. And so we are complying with it.
And in terms of beyond that, the police department and IT are reviewing some options that may allow us to be able to share information that still is within the law. So we're still in the exploration phase, I think is accurate.
Perfect. Thanks, Ms. Gaines. That's what I was kind of looking for, figure out. I understand we need to comply with the law, but making sure we are making efforts to try to, because I do know that DOJ memo did provide opportunities for us to be able to continue to share that communication within certain constraints. So I understand that's a difficult issue and something new that we're dealing with, but I think really important to continue working on that effort. So thank you for that update. The report indicated that only one officer is going to be partnered with a clinician in the PERT program. Do we know yet how many total hours a week will PERT be operating in Palo Alto? Do we have that information yet?
I can jump in on that real quick. So we have a clinician actually in the building there. Again, we're getting familiar with everyone, which is great, and an officer chosen to assign with that clinician and work with them. So they'll be working so far. Again, we're still trying to solidify everything from the MOU, but basically 4 days a week. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there was not adequate funding to have a second clinician to cover the rest of the week. But we are so happy to get started anywhere. So we're very excited, and we'll at least have 4-day week coverage.
Yeah, definitely. Better than nothing, and 4 days. That's good to hear. Are those days and hours being strategically decided on based on kind of like particular times where those types of incidents are highest? I mean, do we have control over that, or is that all kind of however the county wants to structure this MOU?
It's still to be determined, but we'll certainly use them to the best of their ability with the greatest need.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions. Is the CMR program anticipated to begin at all 3 locations, including Palo Alto, at the beginning of 2022, or is it going to start at 1 or 2 locations? I mean, is it going to need to be built up, or is it ready to go all 3 locations?
As of the last update we've received from the county, their interest is in implementing all 3 at one time. So the RFP out right now is for all 3 sites, and it'll just depend on the responses that they get. But their intention is to roll out 3 at once. We were saying, please do us at first if you're going to have to pick. And they said, our plan is to do all at once. So we're hoping that they stick with that.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then final question, another one on kind of the timeline. The report stated that PERT is coming later this year. Any additional estimates on the time frame for that?
Assistant Chief Bender can speak best to it, but it really is just linked to the memorandum of understanding coming from the county. So we need that officially before the program can roll out, and we're awaiting receipt of it.
Okay.
Chief, did you want to offer anything else? Okay.
Great. Thank you. Those are all my and sorry, and just kind of those are my questions. It's just kind of my parting thought here. I did especially on directive letter K under the updates on the remaining directive states that staff will return in the fall of this year with parameters and proposals and strategies prior to engaging in PAPOA's negotiations. I'm glad we'll be reviewing this information. I hope it'll be agendized in a way so that council can really have a substantive conversation on this issue. I mean, I really see this as council's last major opportunity to really be able to enact some meaningful reform of law enforcement in Palo Alto. I think it's also important to engage council early on in this process. I'm not sure how far we are in the process, but we need to be engaged early on, really with the goal of ensuring that the union contract doesn't act as a tool to shield officer misconduct, nor as a way to make it unreasonably difficult to terminate bad officers, like through binding arbitration or whatnot. Something we've seen across the state and across the country, unfortunately. So I do think the contract's proper role is to focus on work hours, conditions, pay, benefits, et cetera, but not to provide unreasonable safeguards against police oversight and accountability. So I think the sooner council can be involved in those conversations, the better. Those are all my comments, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Tanaka, we're just going through each of the sections that they presented. Do you have any comments or questions on the work assignments for the race and equity work?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. One question is, I saw this on slide, well, there's no numbers on the slide, so I don't know what slide it is, but the demographics of the board and commission.
Yeah, they're at the bottom in terms of numbers. They're just gray.
What did you say?
The numbers are at the bottom of the slides. They're just gray numbers.
Oh, it's really, oh yeah, slide 6. It's really hard to see. So it's slide 6, yeah. So so anyways, So this is for the people that answered surveys. This is what the so I guess 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Those are kind of the for the folks that answer, right? This is not okay. Well, what I think would be kind of interesting would be to see what the breakdown is of the ones serving, the people serving, and then of the people of the population as a whole in Palo Alto, and of the people that apply, right? To see what the breakdown is. So that's something that I would be interested in. I don't know if you already know the answer, but if not, that's something I would love to actually see. How does it differ, right? How does the makeup of the population here differ from the people that apply for boards and commissions versus the people that serve? So I don't know. Do you happen to know what that looks like, and whether it's pretty consistent or it's very different, or how it looks?
Yeah, so there's 2 strands there that you're pulling. One is on just the census data for Palo Alto. So we do have that information. The 2020 census data is still being updated on their website. So for race, we easily have that information. For other pieces like ownership, et cetera, we're still trying to acquire it. It's in census tract level right now. So I'm doing some work on that. To the second question that you have about applications, this information actually is not included in the application for boards and committee and commission members. So that, in terms of using this information as a baseline for thinking of where you want to go, that is something that could be considered of even asking for some of this demographic information of applicants. We collected this information as a survey of existing boards and committee members. So that is why we have the level of detail that we do have.
Okay, well, I guess, to me, representation is actually kind of important. And so last I heard, and maybe since do you know what is the latest ethnicity breakdown for the census for Palo Alto?
Give me a second. It's in the report. Let me pull it up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you can pull it up and also pull up slide 9, and we just look at how they match up. I think that would be interesting. So maybe as you dig that up, I'll move on to my next question, and this may have to do with more that maybe one of the members of the police force could answer. But how you guys might have heard of the kind of, what do we call it? The incident at Fuki Sushi. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of it or heard about it. Sounds like maybe you haven't heard much about it.
Looks like Assistant Chief Bender has.
Council member, are you talking about the hate incident at Fuki Sushi a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I guess more than a couple weeks, maybe a month ago now, but
sure. Yeah, we're aware of it.
Okay, so I guess how's the one request I made a while back was tracking these incidents. How are you guys doing in terms of tracking these incidents?
So one of the things that we do and that we're required to do is take police reports for any type of hate incident that occurs in our city, and we're doing that. And those reports are filed and they're tracked under a certain heading, and then we're able to either recall them or couple them or have a reference to them. And also because they're not happening overly frequently, they are happening. The chief and I and other staff members are aware. They do come to our attention and they are discussed when they come up.
So do you guys have or is it in the report somewhere where we can see what is the number of incidents like this over time?
Yeah, we report, I believe it's annually. Captain Wagner can correct me if I'm wrong. We report to the Department of Justice these stats.
Okay, are you able to tell us what it was like? If you report to our Department of Justice, can you tell us what it is?
Not off the top of my head tonight. No, I'm sorry. If that's what you're asking, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
Okay. Do you have the information somewhere that is readily available, or is it secret? Or
I think it's
I
on
believe
the,
it's-
on the website, right?
The website?
I think there
Yeah.
is a section in the police webpage. In one of the sections, there's a list of different crimes, and there's a number there. So
Okay.
it is tracked. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Captain Wagner can help me out. But I believe that on our police accountability page, these stats can be found.
Oh, really? Okay.
April?
Correct. Yeah, it's in our annual report because it's a statistic that the DOJ wants reported every year. So we do publish that information every year.
Okay, great. Does it break down for the different ethnic groups, like what the incidents are?
No, it is not that specific.
Okay. Is that something that we could do, or is that something that's not possible?
Unfortunately, some crimes are protected information, and so it's not all publicly releasable information. So I would have to do some more research to see what other information we could do on any particular case.
Okay. Well, I'm not asking about this particular case. I'm just looking for aggregate data. So basically, like for the different ethnic groups, like what is the, what I'd be kind of interested in is knowing number of incidents reported by different ethnic groups over the years, something like that.
It depends because the hate crime it covers a lot of different crimes. Also hate incidents, which is something that doesn't rise quite to the level of hate crimes. We report both because we need to, and it's very important. So it's not so simple to say that a hate crime was just against a particular race or person. It could be a combination of things. So I understand the inquiry of that data, but it's not so simple.
Okay. And so you say it's on the website right now. Can someone send me the link?
Yes, let me get that to you.
Okay, great. And so I don't know if Chantel, you actually have the other two charts that you were talking.
Yes, so you asked about the representation in terms of racial groups in Palo Alto. So according to the 2020 census, our population that identified as white is 48.5% of our population. Those identifying as Asian is 35%. I'm going to get rid of the decimal point, so just 35%. And of note, the white population percentage went down and the Asian percentage went up between the 2010 and 2020 census. And Hispanic is the next one. It is about 7%. And then the other groups are less than that.
Okay. And so how does that mesh up? Are you able to bring up slide 9 just so we could refer to it again?
Yep, give me a second. And they are not the same is the short answer to your question.
Okay. Okay, great. So you have slide 9. Okay, so I think you said that Asian is 35%. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay, so it's 35%, and then white is 48.5%. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so you can round to 49. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you know if there's like a severe survey response bias in terms of, the question 6, did only maybe the white respondents respond, or is this kind of maybe like a good sample of what our boards commissions look like right now?
I will double check the data once I'm not screen sharing, but I believe this question was not heavily skipped by many participants. So
Okay,
I don't
so
know
it's
that
a
exactly
fair
is
sample,
answering
you're
your
saying?
SKU question, but I can say most respondents did respond here. But I'll check what that 12% number actually is when I'm not sharing.
Okay. But even if the 12% went towards, let's say, okay, for the Hispanics almost matches. I think you said 7% Hispanic in the city, and it's 6% on the commission. So that's not, the same, but it's pretty close. Asian, I think you said it was 35%, but it's 9% here. But let's just say decline state was all Asian, right? That would be 21%, right? And then white, I think you said was 48%, right? So this is 71%. So So if I were to read this, in terms of representation of the city, white is overrepresented, right? Asian is severely underrepresented, and Hispanic is about the same. Is that a fair way of, based on what you told me, is that kind of what this chart is showing here, or am I missing something here?
I wouldn't speak to over or underrepresented personally, but I would say that these numbers are different than the actual city demographics, which I think is the point you're pointing out.
Yeah, okay. And what do you think that is?
I want to stop sharing so I can pull the other thing up. I don't have an answer to that question in terms of why one group is represented more than another. I think for the demographic information, it's just sharing as a baseline of where we are, so that as you continue to do recruitments and looking into the community and trying to encourage people that are interested to apply, you also have awareness of who is currently serving on your boards and commissions.
Okay, well, I for one would like to try to see more representative boards commission. I think that I think diversity is a good thing. I'm glad to see the Hispanic representation is actually pretty good. The Asian representation looks really low to me. Maybe not to others on this committee, but to me it looks pretty low, and it's something that I think we should strive to improve. I actually read somewhere that the Asian population is one of the fastest growing in the county. I'm not sure about the city, but in the county certainly. So yeah, but the other demographic aspects would be interesting to look at as well, age and whatnot. But I realize you may not have that readily available.
Councilmember Tanaka, can I add one observation too?
Sure.
When I served on the Palo Alto HRC several years ago, we observed the same exact kind of issue that was occurring within the city, with the lower representation of our Asian population being involved on a council and as various boards and commissions, and took action then to attempt to try to understand the reasoning and to try to promote greater inclusion and diversity, and had a couple of commissioners working on that exact issue, and they really struggled to be able to not only address the source of the reasoning, but also to be able to improve that. So I do think that's a really critical kind of question to try and figure out, why is this the case, and then seeing how we can address it. But it has been happening for quite some time.
Yeah, I appreciate your work on that, and applaud you for doing that, because I also kind of observed that, right? And I kind of wonder, why, I mean, as some of you guys know, I've attended a lot of these Stop Asian Hate rallies, right? And a lot of people kind of feel like they're not, being really well represented, and some of the hate crime incidents aren't really being heard or taken care of. And I think Chair Koo, helped organize that. Was that Bowles Park, right? You actually, all of us were there. All of us were at that Bowles Park event. And I was talking to the owner afterwards, and she was talking about how she had to really hustle, right, to try to get this, in terms of this incident. And it just seemed like, wow, where's the representation, where's the justice, right? And so that's why I'm asking this question, right? Is trying to understand representation, understand where we are in terms of tracking these hate crimes, right? Especially for because Asians are 35%, so it's the second largest segment ethnicity in the city, right? But certainly it's not being reflected on our boards and commissions. And so I think one discussion that would be good for us to have is, and maybe Councilmember Stone can help lead this, because it sounds like you have actually done some root cause analysis of this, but would be, how do we change that? And that's one of the reasons why I was trying to understand from our applicants, is it our applicant polls just not there? Is it who we vote in not there? Like what's the source of the issue, right? Because I think we want engagement from all members of our community, not just from one segment of the community. I think that's important.
Yeah, and some of the things that stood out in terms of this is just even being able to track the data. So this process of collecting the data, I think being able to do that annually is important, so that you're able to see change over time. So right now, this is the only information that we have on this information, or on demographics for boards and commissions. So that as a task for annual work, I think is part of your discussion. So you're able to see, is this a baseline, and then see how things are moving. And another is if you were thinking through your boards and commission process, if there's additional information you would like to know, or et cetera, those would be things to think about as some potential changes to help you assess how you're moving along in that regard.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys, I don't know if someone sent me the link by email or something, but I didn't see the link of the hate crimes or hate incidents. Did someone send me the link? I just didn't get it, or?
No, Councilmember Tanaka, I'm having difficulty finding it. We have the data because we've presented on this just at HRC, or I believe earlier this year.
Okay.
My time does run together, but I will get you the information you're looking for and make sure you can have copies of it's public documents that we send to DOJ on it. So I'll make sure.
Okay. And you know, and I hate to harp on this, but I think, you know, because I've attended probably about 18 or so Stop Asian Hate rallies. I'm like a connoisseur of them. So I've been to a bunch of them. I've talked to a lot of different people, and I haven't been to a rally. I've probably talked to hundreds, if not 1,000 people on this topic. And so many Asian Americans have told me about hate crime incidents, or not necessarily crimes, but incidents, right? That's happened.
Councilmember.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So and that's why I kind of want to understand how we're doing in terms of tracking this, because this is one of the largest ethnicities in our city, and I just want to make sure that the Asian voice is being heard here, because and that's why I'm really interested in knowing, are these incidents, like, you know, are they being reported? Maybe it's lack of reporting, because maybe people are just not reporting it, right? And
so I would say, I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but as of the articles I can find, we only had, I believe, 4 reports last year for 2020. Reporting is a big issue, I think. If we don't, you know, we can't write down and document what we don't know happened. So
okay.
I think if there's a message to be sent out, it's please, you know, let us help. And do that by reporting these incidents.
So are you saying only 4 were reported?
For 2020, and I'll confirm that, but that's so far what I have. We have very few reported.
I know more than 4 just offhand. So yeah. So that's something I would like to know also, right? It could be that people are just not reporting. I mean, an incident happened to me, I didn't bother to report it to police. So I'm part of the statistics here, right? Yeah, to me, it's just kind of interesting to know, like, there's I'm not sure if you guys know, but there's like a Stop Asian Hate tracker, right? And there's like a gazillion reports coming in. Like there's just, I mean, it's like off the charts, right? Like from all over the country, not just Palo Alto, it's all over all over. And so it sounds like, you know, maybe people are okay going to website reporting, but not necessarily making a police report about it. But so is this just 4 incidents against Asian Americans, or 4 incidents total against all ethnicities?
4 incidents total.
Wow. Okay. That's incredible. Okay.
Councilmember Tanaka, just to kind of continue on what Captain Wagner was sharing, we did earlier this summer, Captain James Reifschneider did partner with HRC in regards to hate crimes and hate incidents. And I know that Chair Smith was there, and I think Chair Smith may be able to just have some valuable input on some statistics if he wants to share.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Chair Smith, if you can, that would be awesome.
So we had the district attorney office from the county. We also had some third-party organizations, and the report on Asian hate crimes was because the community was insular, like many immigrant communities. They weren't getting the reports in to respond to it. So for example, in the county of Santa Clara, 2 years ago, it was only 15 or 16 hate crimes totally reported. And last year it was 28 because people are reporting them now. Also, the significant difference between what is somebody's free speech that's offensive, what's a hate incident, and what's a hate crime. And with that calibration of that scale, somebody can say something that is extremely demeaning to my humanity, but it's their free speech. It does it until it becomes where it violates, it becomes an incident or a crime. So there is those gray areas that sometimes it sounds like as if it's underreported, but it doesn't have an underlying crime or incident under it. And that was what the HRC found.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, so like for me, like someone's yelling at me as I'm biking, right? So that's freedom of speech thing, right? Because people I guess have a right to do that, right? Or like Fuki Sushi, same thing. That's a freedom of speech type of thing. Is that how it's kind of categorized? And so that kind of freedom of speech type of incidents, even though maybe distasteful, is not a crime. And so that's part why some of that doesn't get reported, right? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, let me just make a distinction. Whether it's a hate crime or a hate incident, it does get reported, and we do take a report and conduct an investigation, and those stats are reported. What differentiates the two, and to Chair Smith's point, is in regards to a hate crime, there has to be an underlying crime based on a number of protected categories. A hate incident, to Chair Smith's point, could be a derogatory statement based on someone's race or ethnicity that doesn't rise to the level of a crime and is within their rights to say that is offensive based on the category that they're talking to that person about.
And Councilmember Tanaka, we're also, I believe staff and the police department is also working on a town hall that is going to be coming up soon in order to differentiate, the hate crime and incident. But also, I think I understand is that within there is the process of when the police actually investigates it, they perhaps can charge the person, and then from there, how they put the package together to send over to the DAs. So where is the line that police hands off to the DA's office, and it's in the DA's hand to decide to prosecute or not to prosecute? So there is a very fine line where it ends with the police and it goes to the DA's office. And so there will be more conversation about this in the town hall. And I think it's upon us as well as our city to encourage people to report these matters so that we do address them.
Yeah, I remember talking to the owner of the Fuki Sushi restaurant, and she was like incredibly disappointed with the inability for action to happen, right? Even though, this and some of you may not have heard about this or followed it, but so for me, I think, there's the education portion, right? We're trying to educate so that, there's not these kind of biases happening.
And
but
that's why we have this important work in front of us, which is the race and equity work.
Yeah.
And we're really trying to address, the racism issue and also hate upon each other. I
guess I'll try to look at it from both sides. One part is the education portion, but the other portion is kind of what can be done, and maybe nothing can be done because it's just constitutional freedom of speech, and people have the right to be racist against each other, right? So
no, I also think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the DA level. Yeah. So that's another discussion.
Well, I mean, that's something which I'd love to see if is there something that we could do on a city level that can actually help the DA, with these kind of incidents, like take the Fuki Sushi incident, right? Is there something that us as a council members can do? I'd love to know. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if Molly has any ideas, but I don't know how much of this is constitutional and just people's right to say racist things to people, and how much of it maybe there's nothing that can be done. I don't know, but I'd be interested in seeing if there's something that can be done on a council level.
Ms. Stump, do you have anything to add?
Well, certainly the council plays a very important role in the community in terms of convening conversations, advocating, reflecting and amplifying concerns of the community, advocating for change with other agencies. So all of those things are really squarely within council's role. I mean, certainly we can do statements, proclamations, those types of things to make a sort of a more formal statement as a body, if that's something that the council's interested in, this committee could recommend that to the full council.
What about to what the chair Ku said, which is something that could give the DA, like in the case with Fuki Sushi, the DA basically said nothing I could do about it. It's something that could give more teeth to incidents like this.
So what the DA is almost always doing, I think this is correct, the chiefs and Captain Wagner can also offer their thoughts, is applying standards in state law. So the DA is looking at how the facts and the evidence lines up with the elements that have been reflected in the criminal code, which is a state legislative activity. So certainly, we just had the conversation with the state legislative advocate, but that would be one area where we could perhaps encourage the state legislature to do more. Obviously, free speech is a constitutional level set of issues, so it has to be balanced. And California doesn't have the right to override the federal constitution or even the California Constitution, free speech, but there could be things that could be done to adjust the criminal code in California, the penal code, to make prosecutions easier.
But is there anything we can do on a council level? Any besides just proclamation resolutions? Is there any real action that we can do that would enable some sort of action on? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what happened at Fuki Sushi, but something like on that level. Is there anything we can do, or is this really not much other than just talking about it?
Well, I think your state legislative advocacy program, it is talking, but it's talking with a purpose.
I mean, that's state level. I'm talking about city council level.
So could the city create a local criminal?
Yeah, something local
provision? So the city does have an ability to create municipal crimes, and we do have a small number of them, as most cities do. They are misdemeanors only. The cities do not have the authority to create felony crimes, so they're misdemeanors or infractions. And that would be something that the city could look at. Of course, we would also have the obligation to make sure that we were not either acting in an area where the state has said they've occupied that field, and so we're going to be preempted, or where we're coming up against constitutional problems. But I think that's what you're asking. And yes, the city does have the ability to create municipal criminal offenses at the misdemeanor or infraction level.
Okay. I mean, for me, I would be interested in seeing if that's something that we could do. Maybe, I don't know if the HRC could perhaps look into that and maybe get the ball rolling or something where, yeah, okay, great. So that we can see how do we, at least from the DA side, get the ball rolling somehow on this.
So on this, I think that we're going to make a recommendation to council so that council can defer to HRC or, but it has to be a recommendation. So we can't do a direct.
No, I understood. Yeah. Okay. So
And so
I guess
just small point of information, council member. Typically, the district attorney does not actually prosecute municipal crimes. The officer in charge of doing that is myself. So that my office does that.
Okay.
Sometimes the DA stands in for us because they're in court all the time and we're not. But they don't. The direct obligation to enforce those things is with the city attorney's office.
Okay. Well, even better. So you could tell us what's possible, realistic, feasible. Yeah. So that's good. So I mean, and yeah. So yeah. When at the chair when it's ready, I'll definitely support that idea. So.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, with that, I just have very quick, one quick question is directive number E, develop, update a policy on the timing of the records release related to investigations qualifying for the public disclosure under SB 1421 and AB 748. It says that it's completed, but I was wondering if the policy was available for the public to look at. Is it posted somewhere, or how do we get to kind of see the draft and also the general public?
I can answer that. So right now it's a procedure that is within the department I would have to get with probably Molly in the city manager's office to determine how that's best put out to the public.
Okay, thank you. Then I just want to go ahead and move on to the other, but before I do, I just want to say I'm very excited that the PERTs, the PERT program, you know, the CMR, the trust actually, and of course that they're all coming together. And I want to also make sure that we acknowledge Congresswoman Eshu for her work and for pushing forward to get the earmark funds. So those are all very exciting. I kind of see, you know, we're there. I can actually feel it, you know, whereas some time ago it's like really far and it didn't seem achievable. So thank you for that. And I think most of the questions that I had are answered, so we can move on to the next matter, which is Directive M, I believe. It's the CEDAW recommendation. So there's some questions over there to answer. And if council members have any comments and questions, we can go ahead and take it now. If nobody's going to go ahead, I'm going to go ahead first. You know, a lot of the work that I see that is being done, it looks like, you know, it has links with the HRC's work that has been happening on race and equity, and then also for women equality, right? Women and girls. So I was just wondering how much of that is already being done within the CEDAW family.
As far as CEDAW itself, or some of the other action items from the summit, council member?
So I'm not only talking about the summit. So summit is part of it, but then some of the work that, say, for example, the police department has been doing, HRC has been doing, as well as Ms. Gaines has been doing. It seems like there's some linkage there already.
Yes, there are certainly aspects of what would be included in a CEDAW ordinance that staff is already looking into doing. If you, Ms. Gaines spoke earlier of, and Ms. Portillo, regarding the demographics of staff. So as Ms. Spencer also noted, that is a key part of a CEDAW ordinance. If you look at one of the suggestions from staff for the Recreation Division to do a review of programs and services, looking at it from an equity lens, that is definitely something that has been included in some CEDAW ordinances, to do some equity assessments of different city departments or programs. So there are definitely things that staff have been working on or will be working on that would be part of, that have traditionally been part of other CEDAW ordinances. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. And I also noticed that Santa Clara has adopted a CEDAW ordinance, have they not?
Yes.
And as well as San Francisco.
San Francisco has long had a CEDAW ordinance. San Jose and Santa Clara County have been from the last 2 to 3 years, and they've structured them very differently. The county has a task force that is just identified like six issues, and they talk about, and they have a forum about one of the issues like every 6 months. And then they report the findings back to the Board of Supervisors. But beyond those 6 issues, they did not identify other ones to be explored at this time. The city of San Jose, last I checked a couple of years ago, their HRC was beginning the process of looking at how it would do any kind of equity assessments of their different departments. But you know, with COVID, I have not really, you know, some of the work has gone to a back burner, but there are different ways in which different cities have written and started and worked on their CDAW ordinances. There's kind of a template, but that, template is a suggestion, and every city can look at what they want to do for CDAW based on the size and the needs of their local city.
Okay, so should City of Palo Alto decide to actually work on our ordinance, then it would be very much something that is going to address local issues.
We would have the opportunity based on, input from council, and as staff looks into this, to have a CDOT ordinance that is reflective of, what the council would like to see in it.
Okay, so just to answer the questions that's in the report, if the breakout sessions and Jamboard notes with regards to affordable housing, should go to the housing element. I don't see why not. For the council to recommend to council to initiate additional work on the ordinance for CDOT. Yes. I think all the questions is yes, so I don't need to go through all of them. So if my colleagues have any questions or comments, please, Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Ku. I'm with you, Chair, regarding the 5 questions being an affirmative. For me, though, I am curious. Does staff have any reservations or concerns about moving forward any of these 5 recommendations before we as a body make a recommendation to move these in the proper direction?
And Mika, you can jump in as well, but I don't think there are any reservations. We just would have to make sure that they fit aligned with all the other priorities with which we're working on. So I would say not the expectation of tomorrow to have all of them done, but there otherwise are no reservations. We understand the feedback provided at the summit. Mika, did you want to add anything to that?
I would be in concurrence with what you said.
Great. Yeah, I'm supportive of all 5 as well. I'm shocked that it's taken so long for the CDAW initiative to really be able to progress, but excited that we can have an opportunity to be able to do that. And then Chair Ku answered, kind of addressed a lot of my questions and issues. One final question. I saw that the keynote speaker at the summit, Ms. McKenzie, challenged the city to consider naming a street after a woman of color and as an inspiration to young girls. I think that sounds like a really great idea. But I'm curious, what is the process for renaming a street? And are there any streets that are really kind of ripe for this name change? Maybe future streets, maybe like NVCAP when we're looking into that? Is this at first glance, it seems like a simple change, but I don't know. This could be far more, like probably anything else, probably far more complicated than it first appears.
We'd have to do more research. I have heard from other conversations that have come up about street name changes that it is a process related to the property owners on a street, but that's as far I know that much to be dangerous, and I would have to do further research.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think worth looking into, or at least, again, I think there's a good chance we may have some new neighborhoods or at least a couple of new streets coming online in the next 5 to 10 years, and so maybe that's something that we can really be considering if the actual process of a name change is too difficult. But yeah, happy to support the five recommendations.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka?
I also support it. I'm kind of with the other customers. It seems kind of obvious. So yeah, I think we can move on.
Thank you. Councilmember Stone reminded me about Ms. McKenzie and what she said. I actually think that, what she suggested about intersectionality, that's a very interesting topic that might want some exploring. And I don't know if HRC has considered that, you know, it just seems very interesting for a discussion in terms of how they overlap in a person's life, all the different segments. And also it touches on different backgrounds also. So especially with African-American and Hispanic ethnic backgrounds. So that would be very interesting, as well as the church group, right? Religion. So, okay. Next is 100 Conversations. Does anybody have comments, questions? Want to go first? Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I just first want to thank Chair Smith, former Vice Chair Stinger, Minka, and really just the entire HRC and staff on hosting the 100 Conversations about race. I mean, these are really difficult discussions to have, but they're ones we really need to have as a community. I'm glad we're having them. The report was very helpful. I appreciate that. I think this is something that the full council should be able to see and understand what the experiences are of people living in the community, and especially those who don't feel included or welcomed. Those are things that the council should be addressing. I only have one question. I'm just curious what the HRC's needs from the council are regarding the recommendation that the HRC convene civic and community partnerships around those 4 issues outlined in the recommendation. I'm just not clear what you're asking from council.
Well, we're asking for the runway to go ahead and continue to develop and formulate the plan and dive deeper. You know, we received this as a recommendation initially from council. We're bringing back the packet as asked for by council. So, you know, we see there's more work there. And given some of the comments like what Councilmember Tanaka talked about around race, ethnicity, belonging, there's a lot to that onion that still needs to be unpeeled. And I think this 100 Conversations was a good start to it, but I don't think it's the final stop.
Great, thank you, Chair Smith. Agreed with you, and yeah, and I would be happy to support that request. I think it's reasonable, and I think you're on the right path, and I'm very envious of your sound system behind you.
Thank you.
Good time.
It is.
Those are my only my comments. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, just also want to thank you guys for your work on this. It looked like a tremendous amount of work. So thank you. I think these conversations are very valuable. So I don't want to say the same thing that Councilmember Stone just said. So I'll just echo his comments. Thank you, though.
Thank you both. And former Chair Stinger, do you have any comments to make?
You have to unmute, Valerie.
There you go.
Got an error message there. I just wanted to thank you for the appreciation, but also extend that to the people who hosted the conversations. They were really brave. They went out on a limb, so to speak. We gave them a lot of tools and case studies and examples, but this was the first time this had ever been done, and they let us, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you too.
Can I just interject and just call to the council's attention, just the incredible amount of work that it took to set up these conversations, Chair Smith, but very much under the leadership of former Vice Chair Stinger. All the meetings it took with the Stanford folks, with the community committee, creating an entire toolkit, training every single leader on the toolkit and getting the results. It was a tremendous effort. And if anything could be like, you know, a legacy for Vice Chair Stinger and her 2 terms on the HRC, I would definitely like this to be it. And I know the chair and I are very grateful.
Yes, we can't say enough about what Vice Chair Stinger did on this, because she definitely was the quarterback, the leader, the one that pushed the chain across the line. So we're grateful for all of her work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed. Even after you finish with the HRC, you continue to follow through with it and work on it. So it was a great presentation. It was a great work. I participated in one of the conversations, so it was interesting hearing all the questions and having to really delve into thinking. Thank you for your presentation, Chair Smith. And if there's no other questions, I think that we can make the recommendation to council for looking at the 5 questions supporting CEDAW, the 5 questions that is on here. And also to support and recommend what Chair's HRC's work, and to continue those conversations or the work that you want. Ms. Gaines, did I get everything?
Okay, I'm reading, sorry. I was sending the 5 bullet points to the clerk's office.
Okay, I'm sorry.
5 questions. Uh-oh, ready to go. And I know those are as questions to the clerk's office, so we can clean that up. Specify questions. I think you all mentioned one other thing. Just check.
Chantal, did you send those to me or to Danny?
To you on Teams.
Oh, via email. Okay.
Yeah, but I think you have them.
These are the ones that I pulled off the slide. Yes.
Oh, and the last one was Councilmember Tanaka's point about an interest in exploring local. I'm gonna really mess this up. Local.
Basically, what Molly was saying in terms of having like a misdemeanor ordinance, I guess I'm not sure the right word, but basically I want to enable the HRC to be able to kind of develop this idea and then try to get something that maybe the council could review, but something that could actually be something that maybe Molly's office could enforce, because I didn't realize misdemeanors actually Molly's office enforces, something that would give them the ability to, I guess misdemeanors, there's fines or a warning, I don't know, something that could be done to, like in the cases with Fukushima and others. So
to address
racism, or I guess I'm trying to think of what's the right word. I think we all talk about the same thing, but we're trying to figure out, maybe, I don't know, you're the attorney here, Molly, so maybe you could tell us what would be a good way to enable, the basic idea would be to enable the HRC to kind of develop this further. And then you could come back to council, and then council as a whole could see if it made sense and perhaps vote on it.
So it's sort of true what you said, that we all know what we mean, and yet I'm listening hard because I'm not sure we're all talking about the same thing. And
okay, well, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, and then maybe
great.
my fellow council members could also weigh in on this. So what I'm thinking is something where, I was standing in Bull Park talking to the owner of Fukushima, who's telling me about like how she's felt helpless, right? That this kind of really bad incident happened. Pretty much the person was not remorseful whatsoever, and felt like the DA felt like there's nothing that they could do. So is there for me, the question is, can we come up with an ordinance that would give, let's say, your office the power to take action on cases like this? And even if the action is small, like $100 fine, something where it says this kind of action, this kind of behavior is not right and not acceptable in our city. That's what I'm thinking. But I'd love to hear from my fellow council members here to see if they have a better idea than that. But I'm just trying to think of something where we could take some sort of action, because we already passed a resolution on this, but obviously this keeps on happening. And I think the incidents are woefully underreported, at least to the police department. Because I look at that, the anti-Asian hate crime tracker, and it's like off the charts, right? And yet, just a small fraction of them actually get reported. So, I mean, the problem is actually much bigger than we actually see right now. At least this what we see from the police department. If you go, anyone can go to the tracker and look at it, right? And it's alarming if you look at it, right? It's like the number of crimes is just off the charts, or incidents. That's maybe not crime, incidents is off the charts. So, but I don't know, maybe Councilmember Stone or Chair Koo, if you guys could weigh in here. I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I was in that conversation with Councilmember Tanaka as well at Bull Park, and I think the idea is like, how do we deter these acts that are right now kind of, I mean, of course, they're protected. I mean, that type of speech tends to be protected by the Constitution, but trying to explore, are there ways that we can deter those types of acts through criminal action that goes beyond what the state protections offer, but within kind of the constitutional guidelines of free speech? Is there a way for the city to be able to act on that, to provide those further protections for our residents?
So that was
my understanding of the kind of the conversation and what Councilmember Tanaka has been talking about. And
yes, that's super helpful. Thank you, Councilmember. So one thing you said suggests broader than a criminal so a criminal ordinance, a misdemeanor ordinance, is a punishment type of thing. That's the way a criminal prohibition works. And sometimes those function to deter. And that's one theory of one of the things they do. And that's a disputed theory. Some people believe that the criminal laws don't effectively deter. Your use of the word deter suggests maybe HRC wants to think about a broader set of possible ways to encourage and deter. So I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but do you want to pitch it more broadly like that? Or do you want to ask council to refer to the HRC, specifically the development of a misdemeanor ordinance?
I for me personally, I think both make sense. Yeah, I think talking to the owner of Fuki Sushi was really heartbreaking to see that she really was not going to be able to achieve any type of justice or closure on this issue beyond the community coming out and showing her that support, which was pretty incredible. But not having a governmental or criminal response must be really difficult for somebody going through that experience. So I think if we can pursue this in two different ways, both the deterrence and a criminal action, I think that seems to make the most sense.
I agree with Councilmember Stone on this one.
Okay, so maybe after the words, Madam Clerk, after the words misdemeanor ordinance, you could say, or other method to deter hateful speech while complying with the Constitution.
Or maybe end, like misdemeanors end, because I think that's what Councilmember Stone was saying.
To deter hateful speech and comply with the Constitution. Is that what you mean?
No. To develop the idea of a misdemeanor ordinance and
other methods.
Other methods. Yeah.
Sure.
That works for me, as long as this is clear enough for staff.
Yeah, works for me too. Thank you.
Ms. Milton, I'm very sorry. Those 5 points, I wanted to ask HRC, Chair Kaloma, if that is what you wanted us to recommend to council, or is this what you're going to present and ask of council when you present to the whole council?
Chair Koo?
Yes.
We would want to present to council and ask of council.
Okay, so.
Does that clarify?
Yes, it does. So we don't need to put those 5 points there now. And if we can repost what we had on earlier, the questions from the CEDAW. There you go. Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Koo, so the work on CEDAW, although it initiated at the HRC, it is the work of the summit, and the follow-up at this point is staff-led. It has not specifically gone back to the HRC when it was last presented.
Froze, so I think I'll just finish her thought. I think she just wanted to clarify that items 1 through 5 are staff assignments as opposed to the HRC.
Okay.
Which I think there may just need to be a semicolon around consideration. Discuss the following areas of consideration. Yeah, I think that's fine. As long as the HRC wasn't in that segment. I think that was Minka's point. Just because their work has already happened before on this topic. Not to take them out of the process, just to be clear.
So you want the HRC to develop the misdemeanor ordinance? Councilmember Tanaka?
I thought it'd be worth it for them to take a first stab at it, and that way, when it comes back to us, it's in better shape. But what do you recommend? It could go directly to council too, but I thought it might be good to get them involved. What do you think would be most appropriate?
I would ask Ms. Stump, because I don't think HRC has a attorney that is there.
Well, we'll have to work with them. We don't usually staff their meetings because workload issues. We aren't staffed to be able to sit with all of our boards and commissions when they do their work, and they usually don't have legal issues. There would be legal issues here for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll have to work with them. I think the real value of the HRC, and it's would be considerable value that they could add, would be in terms of exploring, what's needed and what might be able to be done from a policy perspective. But there's real work here in terms of balancing state and federal law against the desire to do more around speech. There's kind of a reason that the district attorney finds himself where he is with the state penal code. We're not the first group to have an idea that it would be great to be able to do more, but kind of find it difficult to balance those First Amendment requirements. So we'll have to work with them. I mean, I just editorial comment, committee members, what's coming out of your committee tonight, I just have to tell you, I'm going to say this to the whole council, and I'm sure that the city manager and assistant city manager, deputy city manager will say this too. This is an incredibly long list of new work assignments. And what the staff presented to you tonight was a really victorious presentation of the last tremendously long list, and working through and accomplishing really most of those. And I think while this work is always ongoing and we're always in a continuous improvement, we really look to council to balance, to carefully think through new initiatives and to balance the limited capacity of staff in terms of what you're asking us to do. And what you're proposing today really doesn't reflect kind of your priorities of all of these wonderful ideas that have come up from the community and the commission. What are your most important ones that you're recommending we do first? Rather, what the committee has done really is said, well, we like all of these ideas, so go work on them all. And while we may applaud that desire, it's functionally impossible. So I just have to tell you that very frankly. So there will be prioritization at some point, either at council or later with the staff, just not being able to get to these things in any kind of timely way. And so there's going to have to be some sort of sorting, an A list, and then we really like these ideas, but we have to wait and get to them later list. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Ms. Stump. I do agree. When I was going through all of that, I thought that would be a lot of work also. So some of them is sharing the findings with certain committees.
Yeah, those are easy.
Right.
That's an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I know, initiating and work around an ordinance, that's going to take a lot of work. So, and of course, the recommendation that Councilmember Tanaka had, and I was thinking that, we'll have council kind of take a look at it and see if it's going to be recommended out. But I am also open to looking at this and prioritizing what is some of the ones that we should have ahead of time. And
I think the council might appreciate the committee's thoughts on the highest priorities. Or you can have that discussion when you get to council with them, but I think you will have to have it.
I
number
definitely-
2 is potentially significant.
Right.
Not just the drafting of an ordinance isn't terribly difficult, but the reason that you would do an ordinance is you're embarking on a new set of work. And so I think there's some thought about what would that be, and how there's a lot of options in terms of how you would put that together. So I think that the council would appreciate your thoughts on priorities.
So, Councilmember Tanaka, I see your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, well, the three of us could do it right pretty quickly, I think, is all just rattle off our priorities or what we think should be the most important. And then that way staff has some idea of prioritization. And that might be what Molly is after, right? Do you want to try doing that just so that staff has kind of feels kind of like a rough, okay.
Yeah,
So
why don't you go ahead?
Okay, you want me to start first, or do you want to start first, or?
No, you go ahead, start first.
Okay. So for me, Asians are one of the largest segment, or not the largest, but one of the largest, like 35% now. So I think the misdemeanor ordinance to me is really important because I've heard it from a lot of people, and so I think that's something that I think is very concrete and very important to do. Not to say the other ones aren't, but just in terms of priority, that's one I would put it in my mind top of the list. I think, I mean, all the other work is also really good too, but I would put that more secondary. So I think I kind of like number 4, just because I think you get people early, right? So starting with the teens is that's also a really good thing to do. Kind of, so I'll be kind of, maybe that's kind of a secondary, and the rest of it's kind of it's also important, but maybe I think the other two prior. I'll go, if I were to kind of give my rough priority, I would say the ordinance thing is first, then maybe share the findings regarding youth on the city's teen advisory council for further action training, microaggression youth mentorship program. Maybe that's the second, and then everything else after that. But I'd love to hear my other colleagues' thoughts on this too.
Councilmember Stone.
So just for some clarification, because it seems like so many of these are just simple, as you already mentioned, Chair Koo, are just kind of simple passing information along to different committees. So Ms. Stump, are you looking for prioritization as far as between the CDAW initiative and this hate speech ordinance? Like which one we would prioritize between those two?
So I really am only in a position to speak for the legal staff's work, and not for the capacity of the city organization as a whole. I do think some of these are straightforward informational items, which are really quite easy to implement. And certainly the various work that outreach and community connection work that the boards and commissions are already doing, that there's a lot of passion around that and a lot of capacity, and that's wonderful. My concerns for my work area really do have to do with the idea of misdemeanor hate crime, a local municipal misdemeanor hate crime rule. And also potentially, I think the staff's already done quite a bit of work, and I know that staff and community have had extensive discussions, but potentially the CDAW can be quite a broad set of work. In some communities, in prior local government entities that I've worked for, there's a whole department infrastructure and commission setup that gets stood up to implement CDAW. So that's one vision. I don't think that's what's contemplated here, but it's not necessarily a small endeavor. I think the staff's already done some work on it though. Chantal?
Slow unmuting. Yes, I think on the list, that is one of the items that is more staff work, but staff has been doing some research on it and has started the work.
And at least it seems like many of these smaller items, just kind of at first, first glance, it looks like many of them fall within different departments, hopefully kind of spreading out that workload. And many of them, I think, seem a little easier to implement. So I won't focus on those. As far as my order between, I think, the two big issues, the hate crime and the CDAW. FBI released a report just a few weeks ago showing that hate crime incidents amongst people of Asian descent in this country has risen 70% over this last year. We're seeing it here in the county and seeing it here in Palo Alto. So I think that is the issue that requires more immediate attention. So I would prioritize that as number one, then the CDAW initiative as number two. And I think the other ones can be done concurrently with all that because they just seem to generally fall into other departments.
If I may also remind, I think that, we're talking about hate crimes and hate incidents. I think the misdemeanor is going to be addressing incidents, right?
Well,
and so is that more complicated because there is going up against the Constitution, free speech and so forth. So would that pose a little bit more need to do research and to get it right? So
right, it is going to pose some challenges, both in terms of the formation of. So, and first of all, any kind of hate crime ordinance would of course be focused on all protected classes. So I assume that you are meaning that. You may, with the other methods to deter hateful speech, you may be asking the HRC to focus particularly on AAPI community experiences there. And so hopefully the HRC chair or vice chair are still on the call and have heard that message. But in terms of an ordinance, you would cover all protected groups. So there's work there to explore that and figure out, where is there room for additional regulation that doesn't fall afoul of the Constitution. And in all likelihood, there's some legal risk involved with any kind of actual adoption or enforcement of something like that. So we would advise you on that as we go forward. And I just don't know as I sit here, because I haven't done this work yet, what space there might be left for additional regulation.
And then on the CDAW ordinance, that's going to have to come to a legal as well.
Yes. Yes, it won't have serious constitutional or legal problems. It'll just be policy questions about how the council wants to focus and, obviously advancing the world circumstances and life circumstances of women and girls, and reducing discrimination and barriers, et cetera, is extremely broad. So what it is that council ultimately decides it wants to focus on, those are policy questions.
Okay, so Councilmember Stone, I'm sorry I interrupted. Did you finish? Okay, so I think I would go, I would go prioritize by supporting the HRC 100 conversation work. Is it specific to the 100 conversation and what they did, the findings that they had from there, and they want to continue working on that? Or is that sufficient just to say support the HRC work?
I'm not seeing that yet.
Yeah, you
Oh.
can be more specific, because I do see that piece of a clause, Chair Koo.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, the support the HRC work, I think, was supposed to relate to the
100
conversations.
Okay, so I would support that one first and add in the work around the 100 conversations. And then I think there needs to be a and or a comma there, because this including enabling the HRC to further develop the idea of a misdemeanor, that's a separate item for council to consider. So I would support the HRC work first, top priority. Then the matters of sharing the notes, that would be 1 and 4 second. Then 3 would be the city recreation department, then CDAW, then the misdemeanor work. So I guess that we're not all aligned with our order of priorities. So
maybe this is a conversation you have with
Have to
your colleagues when you get to council.
Exactly.
That's
Right.
fair enough. And that will give us a chance to also take a look at some of this and maybe have a little bit something more informed to say about the scope of the work that will be required.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to my, what I would,
No,
rant is too strong a word, but it's the second late night meeting and I'm behind on many tasks that were on my plate to do today. So I appreciate your patience with my.
no, you're welcome. No, I appreciate you kind of bringing us back to this matter and understanding the load that staff has. And I know Minka and Chantal hasn't said anything about their load, so I start to worry about that too. But okay, so I'll move this. If I can get a seconder, then we can move forward with recommendations to council if the wording is correct.
I'll second it.
Chair Koo, I have a procedural question, not assuming the direction that your vote will take. But I'm guessing that this will need to go to action for council, just because there seems to be a lot of discussion necessary. So I did want to say that.
Yeah, and I'm sure council wants to weigh in on the load of amount of work it's going to put on staff. So yes, if we could take this to action.
But can we clarify? I mean, I don't imagine anything but the misdemeanor and the CDAW, besides those two, that would need to be action items. The others seem to be appropriate for consent.
I think more so your recommendation as a whole will go to council, and because it is one fell swoop thing that council would need to discuss, that would need to be on action as opposed to consent, because there's actually discussion to happen.
Okay, so we can't break this up for some, no, okay.
So Madam Clerk, can we take the vote, please?
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Koo.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0.
Okay, and I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight and presenting. I'm sorry we took such a long time. Last item on the, before we go to the last item, there's an upcoming event that is the 24th United Nations Association Film Festival. That's going to be held October 21st to the 31st. And their website is on the city website. So please go there and take a look at what kind of shows there are. It's always very interesting when it happens in the whenever I go and watch it. And that concludes this item. And we're going to talk about future meetings and agendas.
So very briefly, Chair Ku and I chatted earlier today. It looks like October will likely be an audit month for the Policy and Services Committee. There'll probably be 2 or 3 audits brought to you. And subsequently, there are some council referrals that we are working on, looking at November and December, as well as legislative guidelines, bringing that back and thinking about the annual retreat. So those are some items forthcoming, but for October, it is 3 audits.
If there's no other comments, I think we can adjourn now. So we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And Danny and Leslie, thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.